Council. Carla, good morning. Please call the roll and thank you.
Good morning. Udaley?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Saltzman?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here. The purpose of council meetings is to do the city's business, including hearing from the community on issues of concern. In order for us to hear from everyone and give due consideration to matters before the council, all of us must endeavor to preserve the order and the decorum of these meetings. To make sure that the process is clear for everyone, I want to just review some of the basic guidelines that I hope makes everybody feel comfortable, heard, and respected, and ensure that decorum is maintained. There's two opportunities for public participation. First, we have an opportunity for people to sign up for communications to briefly speak on any subject they'd like to speak on. These are items that are scheduled in advance with the clerk's office, and if somebody'd like to participate in that opportunity, one can sign up with the clerk. Second, people may sign up for testimony on the first readings of reports, resolutions, and ordinances. If you do sign up, your testimony must be germane to the issue being discussed. Please state your name for the record. We don't need your specific address. Council rules do require that if you're a lobbyist, you let us know that. And in addition, if you're here representing an organization, it's helpful if you let us know that as well. Individuals typically have 3 minutes to testify. When you come up to the microphone, just state your name for the record. There's a little box there, and when you have about 30 seconds left, you'll see a yellow light. When your time is up, there will be a red light, and you'll hear some beeps. We ask you to please stay within your time limits. If there's a disruption, I will issue a warning that if there is any further disruption occurring, the individual or individuals creating that disruption are subject to expulsion from the meeting. If you're asked to leave and you don't leave, you're subject to arrest for trespassing. We don't like that to happen, so let's all just keep it good. If folks would like to show support, a simple thumbs up is great. If you want to show your dismay with something, thumbs down is fine. Just remember, you're going to hear lots of different opinions. Many will vary from your own opinion, and let's all just try to be respectful of everyone's interest. With that, Carla, please call the first communications item.
Item 1082, request of Jill Heinmanson to address council regarding Peterson's Convenience Store.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I'm Jill Hymanson. I'm Mr. Peterson's lobbyist. Thank you for letting us testify today. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read this letter just to give you guys an update on kind of what we're going through right now with our situation. Okay, on December 1st, Peterson's Convenience Store will celebrate our 34th anniversary at our Morrison location. Since day one, we have been open 365 days a year during all hours that the Max runs to best serve our over 900 customers from all walks of life who shop at our store each day. That's every single day, right, Mr. Peterson?
Right, yes.
Every single day for 34 years. Anyway, our celebration is bittersweet because December could also be our last full month in business at our Morrison location because Prosper Portland is requiring us to vacate our space by January 14 for a full year to renovate the Yamhill Spark Park garage and the ground floor retail area. The future beyond January 14th for us is unclear. We were initially very excited about the opportunity to renovate our Morrison store. For us, making significant investments in the space would have been a risky undertaking since we have been on a month-to-month lease since the 90s. Until now, our landlord, the city of Portland, thank you, has never offered to make any improvements. The city gave up on fixing the air conditioner years ago, making the store so hot in the summer that the chocolate bars would melt. Our excitement turned to anxiety when we realized that all the stores in our block, many who are successful local legacy businesses who have been in the community for over 30 years at the same location, were about to suffer the same fate as Portland's Albina neighborhood, where Prosper Portland pushed out families and businesses they considered undesirable. Prosper Portland has met with us several times since 2015 and had said that they have heard Peterson's desire to remain at our Morrison locations. Their actions suggest otherwise. The construction plans divide our current space into smaller units, which indicates that we already face an uphill battle to keep our space. In addition, the application process isn't going to begin until Prosper Portland is ready, which could easily extend beyond when we are asked to vacate. Even if we could apply before we lost employees who have been with the company for decades, the requirements set by Prosper Portland puts us at a disadvantage. Prosper Portland Resolution Number 7240 set a lower priority for locally owned franchises with more than 3 locations, we have 4, and will not allow off-premise sales of alcoholic beverages, and we sell Pacific Northwest wines and beer. The requirement to vacate for an entire year or more during the remodel also feels targeted to root out existing businesses like ourselves. Open store remodels are common, with just one example down the street at Pioneer Square Starbucks. Our space is conducive to staying open since the major construction will occur on the corners of the building and the storefronts are slated to remain intact for some time. It will also be safer for the Max riders because we sell the Hot Pass, and being open late because we're open all hours that the Max operates. Many of our 3,500 supportive comments, right here, we received from our customer who have signed our petition discuss how they feel safer waiting for the Max. So in closing, we really, again, we want to stay, and we were hoping to get some help from City Council because we're not getting it for Prosper Portland. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Hi, my name is Doug Peterson. I'm the owner of Peterson's. We just can't get any communications going with Prosper Portland. Twice we've appeared, a bunch of our employees and myself have appeared before at their open public meeting. We never got a response after appearing. We wrote a letter after we got a letter of support from Commissioner Udaley, and Commissioner Saltzman wrote a letter to Prosper Portland urging us getting some help. And we wrote a response to that talking about we could actually stay during much of the remodel because of the location of the business. And we never heard one peep. We've gone down there and tried to make an appointment. We've heard a name to us. We've emailed them. We've called, and yet no one has responded to set up a meeting or anything. We're just absolutely being ignored. And, you know, we're popular in the neighborhood, as you can see, and over 900 customers a day come in our stores. We've donated to the Downtown Neighborhood Association, has a project at the National Night Out Crime Prevention, and every year we've donated water and soft drinks for that festival, and usually go through about 800 units, water and soft drinks. We've hire handicapped people. We're part of the community, and we're like Voodoo Donuts and Starbucks and Powell's as far as being known in Portland, and we're popular, and we're just asking if there's anything we can do to get a process going to talk about this, because we really want to stay. And like Jill said, the ends of the building are where the major construction are, where they're building out the storefronts or building new stairwells and elevators and tearing out the old ones. In the middle block, as I understand it, they're planning to maintain the building, the storefronts, for some time. We walked through with a bunch of contractors looking at the building, and that's what they stated, that the integrity of the storefronts would stay for a long time during the remodel before they actually do that part of the thing, and we're in the middle of the block. So I think we could be there and be serving the TriMet customers and serving the construction workers, and we have the Hop Pass, and that's the direction that TriMet is going, and they can buy the Hop Pass and we can add value to it. I know that you can do that on your iPhone, or I think you can do it over the telephone too, or on the internet. A whole lot of folks don't have iPhones. I have one, but not everybody does. And especially tourists, people that are unfamiliar, we can help them, you know, navigate getting the hot pass. And I think we can just be a good assistance. So thank you for your time and hopefully maybe some support. Thank you.
Very good. And Doug, I'll have Kyle from my office connect
Okay.
you with Prosper Portland and get you your meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
you.
sir. Next item, please.
Item 1084, request of Stanley R. Herman to address council regarding his question on ORS 830.035.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Well, let's see if we can put an end to this here. You guys have seen me for about 11 months now, but it's all not bad. My name's Stan Herman, president of the History Collection nonprofit group. But like I mentioned, I've been here for 11 months now and need to understand and learn your process a little bit more. And I got to start with, you guys got a tough job at times. I really appreciate the work you guys put in. It's amazing. But in the past, I've talked about 20 city employees to get an answer to my question with no help at all. That's why I decided to come to the leaders of the city here to kind of get some communication going, and it hasn't happened for whatever reasons. For almost 11, now for the record, almost 11 months now, I've been asking the mayor of the council to give me an opinion to a question. Mr. Mayor, 4 months ago, you said you'd give me this is a legal question, I'll have the lawyers give us an answer, but that never happened. I've been asking for your opinion, not a legal answer, although the answers would be the same. I'm asking you now. Every week I hear your opinions regarding a lot of different issues. Why couldn't I get an opinion from anybody up there regarding my questions over the last 11 months?
So, Mr. Herman, to answer your question, and I'm going to answer it annoyingly exactly the same way I answered it the last time you were here. This is a water-related crime. The jurisdiction is Multnomah County. We have no legal jurisdiction over this matter. Multnomah County does.
You didn't read the ORS that I submitted. It clearly says the Portland City Police.
You have received communications from our legal counsel stating their opinion.
They didn't give me an opinion. But anyway,
I'm looking at the emails right in front of me.
But anyway, if you'd read the ORS, it clearly says the first peace officer that shows up. But anyway, we're going to go on because I got something positive. I'm not just here to bitch and complain about things. I got some solutions, okay?
Thank you, sir.
And maybe that's what we've been waiting for. So like I said, I'm not asking your, for your opinion or question, and I'm not trying to bring it up so I can sue the city or anything. None of that is my intentions. I just wanted to point out and have you guys accept the fact that the police was in 08 responsible for an investigation, and I called and reported homeless under the building that burned this building down 3 months ago, 4 months ago. I got a case number. They never showed up and did their job as well. So now I lost millions of dollars there. Well, I'm going to skip down to the real meat of this thing. And like I said, I'm not here to complain. I'll be 70 in December, and I'd like to partner up with the city to give back to the community. A wonderful plan, which you have some pictures in front of you, to build 3 soccer fields on this facility, a storage and launching area for canoes and kayaks for kids. It would require conditional use. We also plan to put a dock on the front to restore put the LCI 715 veteran restored ship there. This is a group that's a for-profit business and a government and a nonprofit business, and we'd like to get some involvement with the city on a fast-track permit and feasibility for this.
Great.
The project is going to be fun, it's going to create jobs, and I've even got a nickname for it so far. I think I might call it Herman/Fish Field. So it could go both ways. It could represent you or the fish. So anyway, I just want to know if there's somebody that, with what you see here, again, maybe I didn't make myself clear in the past. I'm not here to bitch. I'm here to provide something for the community and the city. And if any one of your commissioners, chief of staff, want to sit down with me, we can plan a wonderful, wonderful space for the community for soccer and canoes.
Wonderful. I actually have somebody on my staff who'd be interested in hearing more about
Okay.
your contacts.
I think it'd be great.
Your concept, Soul Connect.
I only got
Good.
40 more summers left. I got to get this project done.
Thanks, Stan. It's good seeing you.
Pardon?
It's good seeing you.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item 1085, request of Wayne Wigness to address council regarding Portland's open data program.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. My name is Wayne Wigness. So earlier this year, I was listening to some people present on making data more accessible to the public. At the time, the shooting of Quanice Hayes was a hot topic, so a lot of people seemed to take this as data on crime and law enforcement. But to me, open data means more than that. When I begin to solve a problem, in the beginning, I have no idea what patterns are going to emerge. It's only once I start playing with the numbers and the variables that connections become apparent that between things that I previously thought were completely unrelated. It's this kind of understanding that is required to gain any kind of user control. Here we're talking about social issues, group dynamics, not just individual actions. There are many variables to identify and even more patterns to emerge. My point here is that I don't see too many enlightening patterns emerging by just making data available on crime and law enforcement. In fact, if an issue has evolved to the point where a cop needs to step in, then we're talking about the effect, not the real underlying cause. There are numerous researchers and curious minds alike here in Portland who would benefit from making data more accessible on infrastructure, medical, environmental, industrial, infrastructural, educational, and to the extent that the government can do so, even consumer data. You got to figure there's a reason why companies are paying good money to access data on seemingly redundant things. More data means more patterns, means more understanding, and that understanding can translate to more leverage for consumers and citizens alike. What triggered me signing up for this communication was over the summer I heard of Disney mining data on 13-year-olds to adjust their marketing strategy. They were getting sued, apparently. My point is, this is kind of a new frontier, and you guys can wait till issues like this pop up on your table, forcing you to regulate a free market, or you can just try to be proactive and provide the data, level the playing field, you know? I do realize this is a new project and they're just getting started, so it's not me pointing the finger at anybody, it's just pointing out that there's more to data than people getting shot. Additionally, I wanted to comment that maybe it might not be a bad idea to have a public comment section on your online websites. That might be more productive than, you're the government. You can have people register with their social security numbers and be accountable for what they say. And that might be a more productive way to communicate rather than through online, news that dramatizes the same issue every week and got us starting back at square one every week, so thank you.
Thank you, and I agree with you on that. And the same comments over and over again. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next item, please.
Item 1086, request of Eli Spivak to address council regarding historic districts.
Good morning, sir. It's good to see you.
Good morning. I'm Eli Spivak, and I'm an amateur historian right now. Thinking about the housing crisis, I go back to World War II sometimes, where Portland had a last big housing crisis. 194,000 people came to Oregon, 150,000 of them working in 85 shipyards. We had a huge housing crisis, and we responded quickly. In 1941, we created the Housing Authority. In 1942, we had the War Housing Code, which is 6 pages, and it seriously made it much easier to internally divide existing homes, and it loosened building codes. And in rereading it, on page 6, I found something which was curious to me, and I printed this out. If you could put it up on there on the map. There's an exception. There's a lot of support back then to increase housing options so people could live, but they didn't apply in single-family zones, Class 1 residential zones. So it got me curious, what parts of the city have effectively figured out how to not be part of that response to a housing crisis? And so I pull out the old zoning code map, and you can see on the next page, single-family zoning pre-World War II, and did a little color by number. Back then, they marked by little dots the single-family areas, and the yellow areas are the areas that were zoned single-family back then. So those are the areas of Portland that didn't really participate in the first response to a housing crisis. So fast forward 75 years to today, and if you look at those yellow areas, those tend to be some of the affluent parts of Portland. We now have historic landmark designations for individual properties I strongly support, but for districts, I have some questions. And it seems like there might be a trend, if you look at the areas I drew in where we have landmark districts, that they tend to overlap pretty well with some of the areas that were protected from being part of the housing solution 75 years ago. It's obviously not the same people. People don't live that long. And there are obviously good reasons for protecting historic homes. But if it turns out that the new land use tool du jour becomes an historic district, which makes it harder to build any new housing, there's no by right process of doing it. In fact, you can't even use housing in those areas to meet our goal 10 supply demand, because you can only do it through the discretionary process. Then we've got an equity issue. And I think that I'm concerned, as new landmark districts get proposed, that the correlation between the landmark district and the affluence of the neighborhood might be much closer than the correlation between the landmark district and the number of historic structures in that area. So the last page I showed is historic resource inventory, and I can only do a screenshot, but you can see that there's landmark buildings all over the city, all over, everywhere. And there's maybe a loose concentration in the areas where they're designated districts, but I think that before we go creating more districts, we should figure out whether there's an equity issue that we're perpetuating here. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Carla, how many items, which items more precisely have been pulled from the consent agenda?
Just one item, 1092.
Please call the roll on the remainder.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. Consent agenda is adopted. Please call 1092.
Authorize Bureau of Parks and Recreation to execute a disclaimer and relinquish all of its right, title, and interest in the Catherine B. Gordon Residence Trust, including its remainder interest and all other interest in the real property at 8533 Southwest 35th Avenue.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, as it says in the ordinance, this property was donated to Parks by an estate, and they didn't ask us ahead of time if we actually wanted this property. It's not located anywhere near any existing park, nor is it suitable for a park ongoing. And the way that the gift was given, if it's not used for park uses, it goes back to the landowner. So basically, we're just saying thank you, but no thank you. I believe that lightning pulled this.
Good morning.
Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning SuperWatchdog X. One of the reasons why I pulled this item is on the trust itself. When Catherine Gordon died on October 2nd, 2004, she set up this trust, number one, to live in the property to the end of her life and then transfer that to the caregiver of her to allow to be live in the property also. One of the things she wanted to also have done is that after the individual that's living there in there also, at a certain time, she wanted to have it transferred to the city of Portland. Now, I'm having a little bit of a difficulty on her wanting to have this done, and the city of Portland is saying, no, we're not going to do it. Now, your statement today was, it's not near a park. Your statement today was, we can't make it into a park. We can't utilize it for public use as a park. And in the trust, it did state that if you tried to sell it for any monetary gains, that would not be approved. Now, my position is that in the trust, if she wanted it transferred to the city, why can't you use it as just a small park? Why can't you do that based upon what the trust has stated, just a small piece of property there? Why can't you do that based upon her wishes in her trust to transfer it to the city of Portland? And now you're coming back and saying, well, we just don't want the property. we wanted to declare it a surplus property. Again, that would be as you reverted back to the trust, which if I am correct, and I'll research a little bit more on this, a few months ago, this property came up during a resolution. And if I am correct, this property came up during the resolution to sell the property. Now, I will go back on the records here and look at that. But you must have referred back to the trust itself that said you can't do it for monetary gains. Now, there's nothing that says that you can't keep this property, allow the current person in there to live in there, as it's stated in the trust, the wishes of the Catherine Gordon. There's nothing that says you can't do that. So I am really surprised that you're turning back and just saying, no, we just don't want this property based upon your trust. We don't approve what's in this trust. And also, when you look in this, she is also donating various money to the Portland Art Museum, various money to other areas that are very beneficial to this city, that again, in this trust was written up her wishes upon her death to see the city of Portland end up with this. Make it into a park. You have a small park right in the middle of a road down there that's only a couple feet. You can make this into a park. Respect her wishes, respect the trust, and take this property, keep this property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next item, please. Sorry?
It's emergency.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I almost forgot the most important and exciting part. Please call the roll, Carla.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, please.
The time certain item 1087, further extend the housing emergency to address continuing homelessness issues, identify council powers, specify an 18-month duration, and waive portions of the zoning code.
Colleagues, we're proposing an 18-month extension of the housing emergency that was first declared.
Together, Mayor?
No, we're reading it separately. That was first declared in 2015. Since first declaring this state of emergency, we've made significant progress to address the housing and homelessness crisis. We've increased shelter, and the number of unsheltered people sleeping on our streets has decreased. There are 2,200 affordable housing units currently in the pipeline through both an increased funding strategy and streamlining the permitting process. We've passed a number of additional tenant protections, from inclusionary housing to mandatory 90-day notice to mandatory relocation assistance. And we're currently finalizing the strategy to construct, acquire, or rehabilitate an additional 1,300 units thanks to the $258 million affordable housing bond voters approved last year. But there's more we need to do to stabilize the systems that impact housing and homelessness in our community. Rents continue to increase, and families continue to be faced with difficult decisions, like whether to take a 20% rent increase or move 45 minutes further away, whether to pay their phone bill or their rent this month, or whether to sleep on the street or stay with an abusive partner. This is an emergency that requires action now. This housing emergency is not just a theoretical concept. It's a practical set of land use and regulatory tools that we can use to address both housing and homelessness in our community. This ordinance asks the Portland Housing Bureau and the Joint Office to help us determine criteria which indicates when we can end the housing emergency, as well as a plan to get us there. I also want to acknowledge the typo in the FIPIS, at the end of the original announcement, which had the incorrect date listed for the extension. It's corrected here in the code, and the intention is to extend this policy out 6 months to April of next year, 2018, just to clarify. I'd now like to ask Commissioner Fish. He has some comments he'd like to make up front, and if colleagues, if anybody else has any comments they'd like to make up front, that would be great too. Commissioner Fish?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, today, Mayor and colleagues, today and over the next few weeks.
That's correct, yes.
You want to?
Sorry, and the typo correcting my typo has a typo. It is 18 months, sorry. Commissioner Fish.
Thank you, Mayor and colleagues. Today and over the next few weeks, we are poised to take 4 important actions to address our housing crisis. I support all of them. Extending the housing state of emergency by 18 months, extending the renter relocation ordinance, developing a roadmap for how we spend the housing bond, and setting a bold vision for boosting the supply of permanent supportive housing, deeply affordable housing with the services that people experiencing mental health crisis and addiction so desperately need. These are very important steps, and I am grateful for the leadership of the mayor, each of my colleagues, and the activist community. But we still have more to do. I believe we should make the renter relocation ordinance permanent and should do so this calendar year. And I will push for continued funding for the Joint Office for Homeless Services during our normal budget process. We are not the only city on the West Coast experiencing a housing crisis, but we have an opportunity to be a leader in supporting innovative, compassionate, and cost-effective solutions to that crisis. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Anybody else? Commissioner Daly?
Thank you. I don't have any prepared remarks. I just want to acknowledge the housing advocates in the room who were the ones that first called our housing state of emergency, and I want to appreciate the council for hearing that cry. It's hard to believe that it's only been 2 years. That was really a turning point in my life as a housing advocate when Justin Burry from Community Alliance of Tenants reached out to me and other housing rabble-rousers and kind of invited us into the fold, and our joint effort made the first noticeable difference in this crisis. So thank you, Mayor, and I look forward to, well, I don't look forward to the crisis extending, but I look forward to the emergency measures we're taking, staying in place.
Very good. With that, we'll introduce Mark Jolin from A Home for Everyone in the Joint Office of Homelessness Services, and Kurt Krieger, the Director of the Portland Housing Bureau. Come on up. Thanks, gentlemen, for being here.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Kurt Krieger, Director of Portland's Housing Bureau. It's my pleasure today to speak in favor of this extension. I'd like to speak to 2 aspects. One is the 180-day review by which the Housing Bureau and the Joint Office of Homeless Services will derive what we think are appropriate metrics to end the housing emergency. This was discussed during our budget process for the 2018 budget. I think with the Council Budget Office and OMF, we're both involved in that effort. We want to make sure it's an open, transparent conversation. We'll be especially looking at not just metadata like vacancy rates by income quartile, but also particular subpopulations, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, and needs by gender, because there's a huge difference across the spectrum. Now that we're doing the point in time annually, I think we'll have better data and more frequent data inputs for that purpose. The other thing I'd like to underscore is the value of some of the more subtle aspects of the state of emergency. The process improvements that have been created by working together amongst and across bureaus, the Bureau of Development Services, the Housing Bureau, the Bureau of Transportation, Environmental Services, and Water especially, to help accelerate the velocity of permit approval for affordable housing projects has been very, very important. Under Commissioner Salzman, we increased the pipeline by, we essentially doubled the pipeline, and we're going to double it again. And it doesn't do a lot of good to appropriate the money without seeing the actual end product as quickly as possible. So I'm pleased that our sister bureaus have been very cooperative. I do think that the state of emergency has sharpened everyone's focus because everyone has proprietary priorities of their own. And in this particular instance, the state of emergency has really helped. So I think things like design review, I know are kind of inside baseball, but the fact that we now have faster ways by which to gain permit approval is profoundly important for the people that will ultimately live in these properties. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, council members. I'm Mark Dillon. I'm the director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak a little bit about what we've been able to accomplish thus far under the state of emergency and why we need to continue this. When you first declared the state of emergency 2 years ago, you gave us important tools, financial resources, and critical focus to move forward a set of strategies to address the homeless and housing crisis in our community. Since that time, the city and the county have worked together in an unprecedented way and in partnership with community-based organizations, advocates, business leaders, philanthropists, and the faith community to expand the resources available to people facing homelessness. With the declaration of the state of emergency, you joined the county to increase total investment in homeless services by 40%, $20 million a year, in addition to the large increases in housing development investments. With the investments in homeless services and the tools provided by the state of emergency, we've expanded services rapidly. In the past 2 years, we've been able to open and help open 6 year-round emergency shelters with over 650 beds of capacity. That includes a new 90-bed women's shelter, a new 120-bed shelter for couples and women, a 30-bed veteran shelter, a new 200-bed shelter for adults that prioritizes women, couples, the elderly, and disabled, a new 14-bed village for women in the Kenton neighborhood, and a year-round 120-bed shelter for families that also serves several hundred additional people a night with overflow capacity. We've also added 50 beds in motel rooms for women and children fleeing domestic violence. In addition, with the help of partners from the business community, each winter, we've been able to open several hundred beds of additional temporary shelter. As a result, since the declaration of the state of emergency, we've been able to help Since the declaration of the state of emergency, we're now able to help over 8,000 people a year access shelter. Prior to the declaration of the state of emergency, that number was around 4,000. Beyond shelter, we've been able to expand successful programs and introduce new programs to prevent people from entering the shelter system. An expanded shelter diversion program for the family system and for the domestic violence system helped several hundred families avoid having to come into shelter last year. A new partnership with the workforce system last year helped dozens of families who were participating in workforce programs to avoid losing their housing so that they could successfully complete their training and find living wage jobs that actually pay the rent. There's a new program that focuses on helping African American men coming out of the criminal justice system called Flip the Script. It connects them with the housing, treatment, and employment services they need to avoid being discharged into homelessness. And there's a new housing stabilization team at the County Department of Human Services that helps their aging and disabled clients avoid losing their housing. As a result of these expanded and new program investments, last year, we increased the number of people who receive prevention assistance by 33% to 6,000 individuals. And we've made similar progress on our ability to place people off the streets and out of our shelters. We've more than doubled the number of housing placement workers doing outreach to camps and shelter in the last 2 years. We have a specialized mental health outreach team. We have culturally specific outreach to the Native American, African American, and Latino communities. We have teams specialized in serving women with histories of domestic violence. We have a team that's out there recruiting private market landlords, and we're offering increased access to employment services and benefit services. As a result of all of these efforts, the publicly supported nonprofits in our community last year helped more than 4,900 people move off the streets, out of shelter, and into permanent housing. That's a 65% increase over where we were 3 years ago, the year before the declaration of the state of emergency. All of this is good progress, and yet the housing and homeless crisis continues for low-income people, disabled people, our seniors, and especially for communities of color. The most recent point-in-time count made it clear. While we can appreciate that our unsheltered number was down by 11%, an outcome that defied the trend of double-digit increases up and down the West Coast, there were still conservatively over 1,600 people entirely unsheltered on one night in February in our community. And importantly, the overall homeless population continued to grow, nearly 10% over the past 2 years. And we saw a particularly dramatic increase, about 24%, in the severely disabled long-term homeless population. And over 70% of that chronically homeless population was still unsheltered. Within this increase, there are other disturbing trends, especially the continued significant overrepresentation of communities of color in the homeless population. Nowhere was this more evident than within the Native American community, which makes up 2.5% of Multnomah County's population and about 10% of the HUD homeless population. What this data tells us is that while we have made progress on improving shelter access overall, that work is not done. We still have too many highly vulnerable people unsheltered, and we need to fully stabilize the shelter capacity that we've created. And critically, we continue to be in a situation where each day more people are becoming homeless and ending up on our streets and in our shelters than are able to escape homelessness. For all the progress we've made on prevention and placement, we need to use the continued declared state of emergency to sustainably improve the ability of our shelters, especially our low-barrier shelters, to help people move out of them and back into permanent housing, to reduce the number of people who are leaving the hospitals, the mental health system, the criminal justice system, and the foster care system and winding up on our streets, to strengthen the integration of our homeless interventions with mental health, addiction treatment, education, and employment services, to expand the targeted interventions for communities of color that are overrepresented in the homeless community, to expand our targeted housing and support service interventions for chronically homeless people, including, importantly, the expansion of supportive housing. And finally, to take the financial and regulatory steps to ensure that very low-income households can remain in the housing they have and to increase access to deeply affordable housing units for families and individuals who are homeless today or become homeless tomorrow. The Joint Office will, as directed in the ordinance, work with the Portland Housing Bureau over the next 6 months to articulate the criteria for determining when we no longer find ourselves in a state of emergency with respect to housing and homelessness. But right now, the crisis clearly continues, and extending the declared state of emergency recognizes that we must continue to prioritize the critical work of sustainably expanding and improving our local response to the housing and homelessness crisis.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we also have an invited panel. So if you gentlemen want to cool your heels for a bit, we have Sharon Myron. She's Multnomah County Commissioner, District 1. Michael Bonac, the Executive Director of Home Forward, and Will Harris, who's the Deputy Director of Join. Come on up and welcome. Thanks for being here. We sure appreciate it. Commissioner, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here today, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Sharon Myron. I am the Multnomah County Commissioner for District 1. And I want to just briefly discuss the work that the county and the city are doing together to expand shelter, streamline homeless services, and get thousands of people into permanent housing. I want to acknowledge up front that I think the most important voices we will hear today are those of people with lived experience of homelessness or housing instability. Those voices, those experiences, they demand that we respond with care, urgency, and meaningful investment. To that end, over the past 2 years, I'm not sure, I keep fading in and out, I'm not.
You're actually up too close to
I'm
it.
too
Paradox.
close.
Yeah, paradox.
Oh. Thank you. To that end, over the past 2 years, Multnomah County has worked closely with the City of Portland and several community organizations, along with advocates, business leaders, and others, to expand shelter beds, prevent homelessness, and secure permanent housing for individuals and families throughout our community. And though it is clear that people are suffering and we have so much work to do, as Mark Jolin just so eloquently stated, last year we saw record housing placements and shelter access. Thousands of people throughout our region got back into housing, found a safer night of sleep, or were kept from becoming homeless in the first place. But at the same time, we're seeing progress, as Mark Jolin also described, we are also seeing how much work remains to be done. The gap between wages and housing costs continues to widen in Multnomah County, and this pressure is especially acute for our lowest income residents. What sticks out to me in particular is that our progress on shelter, on housing, and prevention hasn't been experienced equally by all of our Multnomah County neighbors. The 2017 point-in-time count of homelessness in Multnomah County tells us that people with disabilities and people who are chronically homeless are making up a larger share of our unsheltered homeless populations than they ever have before. These are often people who struggle with health and addictions issues that complicate efforts to get them into and keep them stable in shelter and housing. As I think all of you know, I am an ER doctor, and these are the people that I see regularly, all too frequently in the emergency department. They're people in mental health crisis, people cycling in and out of our criminal justice system, people with chronic physical health conditions, including substance abuse disorder, and people with complex medical needs. They're people who need housing to be able to get healthy, but who often have very, very few housing options available to meet their needs. We cannot leave them behind. These are some of our most vulnerable residents, and their suffering compels an immediate need to respond with compassion and to provide adequate, safe, and habitable shelters, and to rapidly increase the supply of permanent, affordable, supportive housing. It's clear to me that our housing crisis continues to be a true emergency. The action you're considering today will help us respond swiftly and humanely to this crisis. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Commissioner. We appreciate all your great work and your important perspective on this.
Thanks.
Thanks. Michael, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, thank you for having me here this morning. My name is Michael Bonac. I'm the Executive Director of Home Forward. We're the housing authority that serves the City of Portland and Multnomah County. Commissioner Daly, thank you for honoring the memory of Justin Burry here today. His memory continues to inspire me, and it's right that we remember him now. In addition to being the Executive Director of Home Forward, importantly, I am also a mentor. You may know this because I talk about it as annoyingly frequently as possible to encourage other people to become mentors. Check out itsbigtime.org to learn more. And so my little brother and I started a ritual last year. He's a junior in high school now, where on Wednesday mornings I will pick him up and we'll go get coffee and catch up. And then I bring him to school where he has a late start on Wednesdays. So yesterday evening I texted him and I said, hey, unfortunately I have to drop you off at school and skip coffee in the morning. I have to hurry to get to City Hall. And he said, okay, that's fine. And I said, see you in the morning. Seriously, sorry. I'd much rather hang out with you. Sorry. And he said, yeah, it's no problem. What are you doing at City Hall? And I said, testifying that they should extend the housing emergency. The mayor asked me to be there to support it. It's definitely still an emergency. It basically means the city officially recognizes there are too many people without a safe place to live, and they need to keep doing as much as possible. And he said, that's cool. What are they going to try to do about it? And I said, I had to think about this one for a minute. I said, spend more money than they usually would for shelters and housing for people and have fewer dumb rules that make it harder to help people, lol. And then I thought, well, I just educated the kid and wrote my testimony all in one text, calling it a day. But in all seriousness, in addition to the demonstrable need that we all see, there's no question that the need still exists to consider this a crisis and an emergency. I think what is less obvious is that our federal resources are less available than they have been when this crisis started. When we were regularly pulling families off of our housing choice voucher waiting list, about half of them were leaving homelessness. This past January, we stopped pulling names from our housing choice voucher waiting list. It's frozen for this foreseeable future because our federal funding is not keeping up with the cost of rents. In our housing portfolio, which includes deeply subsidized public housing as well as affordable apartments for folks with slightly higher incomes, our Our vacancy rates are over 98%, sometimes creep over 99%. So there's not a lot of movement in the stock of about 6,500 apartments that are also a really important resource in helping people get safely and permanently housed. So I wanted to just offer that perspective. I think in spite of what is a really terrible time in our community, I think thanks to the city and the Housing Bureau, we are seeing more groundbreakings happening, and we know that more affordable apartments will come online. I remain optimistic that we will come to our senses nationally and appropriate more money for voucher funding. And there's more good work happening around renter protections and prevention work to keep people who are in housing stable where they are. So I am proud to stand with some really brilliant and passionate people in this community to do everything possible, and I thank you for your commitment.
Thanks, Will. I'm sorry, Michael, thank you. Will, you're up next, thank you.
My name is Will Harris. I'm the Deputy Director at Join. You've heard from a lot of folks already this morning about the importance of the housing emergency and the declaration, its extension. I hope you'll take my testimony coming from people you've tasked with doing the work on the front line and our recognition that you rightly identified a housing emergency when you originally declared this back in October 2 years ago. That emergency still exists. It's not done. And we see the urgency of the emergency every day in the interactions we undertake with people experiencing homelessness on the streets of our neighborhoods. We feel the scope of the emergency in the tempo of our own work, where we're housing these days twice the number of people that we did in 2013. We understand in higher move-in costs, where we're facing double, sometimes triple deposits just to affect the transition into private market housing. And we felt it among those already stably housed who are having their tenancies threatened by the increases in rent. You know these things, you've heard the statistics on it, but we feel it even personally with joint staff members who have received no-cause evictions. So plainly put, the housing emergency still exists. From our perspective, the original declaration played an important role in focusing efforts and resources and improving outcomes and enhancing service provisions. Mark Jolan spoke eloquently about that. One tangible representation of this service innovation and enhancement is Join's InReach program. This is a multi-agency effort bringing together a diverse number of services to affect housing placement out of safety off the street locations and emergency shelters. So we're leveraging services by housing people, creating new opportunity for others to access those emergency services. What we know is that over the last 20 years of Joint Street outreach, being out on the street, creating a relationship with the folks that are struggling to survive, these people that we see on the streets of our city desperately are looking for the tools needed to end their homelessness. We see the extension of the declaration providing 3 areas that can enhance those tools that we've already built upon. The first tool we need is more housing. We are scouring the county, looking for opportunities for the people that we're working with to place them, to secure housing placement. It's expensive because in this market there just are not units that exist. So our hope is in this declaration that you will continue to streamline processes, that we can accelerate the pace of housing development. We need thousands of units annually to meet the needs of the people that are on the street. We need supported housing units that have the services attached to them, but we also need simply more units of all types that are focused on 0 to 30% MFI for singles and individuals, 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. Additionally, this point has also been made, but in this market, we need more robust tenant protections. Join does have a program that conducts outreach to landlords, recruits them, and tries to retain them by making a business case to them that it's important to work with us. That case is extremely difficult to make in this market. So we see tenancies threatened by what the landlord sees as opportunity in the market. We need robust tenant protections to balance that, and we need additionally education about those protections with tenants and with landlords. Landlords who would do the right thing if they were actually aware of all the protections that the tenants faced. And finally, when we do all this, when we think about innovation, when we think about new service enhancements, we need to continue to build on what we have done so successfully in creating mental health, access to mental health services, in addiction treatment opportunities, in the housing outreach and housing placement assistance that we provide, and in employment support. These are the things we need to continue to do. This has to be an and proposition, not either or. So I thank you for your time this morning. You heard wonderful testimony where we urge you to extend the declaration. We think it's important, we think it's a community statement, and we think it's effective. Joan looks forward to the important work in front of us.
Thanks, Will. And Commissioner Myron and Michael, thank you both as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. How many people do we have signed up for public
I
testimony?
have 43.
Okay, let me do this. Yes, sir.
My guess is that people signed up for both.
I only had one sign-up sheet for both items.
So let's do this. Let's go ahead and also read 1088, please.
1088, extend sunset of mandatory relocation assistance for involuntary displacements of tenants under affordable housing preservation and Portland renter protections.
So let me just give a brief statement on 1088, and that way if people want to testify, they can testify either on the emergency extension or on the relo. Colleagues, recognizing that the costs of involuntary displacement burdens residents, increasing the risk of homelessness and poverty, earlier this year, the City Council passed a temporary mandatory relocation assistance program. While we've been aggressively advocating in the Capitol for additional tools like just cause eviction standard and rent control that could help us address our housing emergency faster, we know there are tools we currently do have that can help us make significant progress. Mandatory relocation assistance is one of the most important tools we have at our disposal. We're now working to finalize the details of a permanent policy. However, the current policy is set to expire on October 6th. Given our commitment to meaningful public engagement for housing policy, this extension provides us time to finalize a permanent relocation assistance policy. The code change ordinance in front of us today extends the current policy for 6 months. However, I want to be clear that we're bringing back a permanent relocation assistance policy on December 6th, and that it's my intention to have a permanent policy in place by the end of this calendar year. I'd also like to especially thank Commissioner Chloe Udaley for her willingness to lead on this issue so early in the year, and frankly, so early in her political tenure. I've sincerely appreciated your partnership, and as the Housing Commissioner, I'm going to continue to value your insights on housing policy. So thank you. I don't know if anybody wanted to say anything else on relo. Commissioner Udaley?
Hello, everybody. So it seems like yesterday we were here to debate the merits of mandatory relocation as a anti-displacement technique. Here we are today at the end of the temporary date we put on that policy, more convinced than ever that it is the right thing to do for people. We've accomplished a lot this year, but honestly, when I reflect on the last 9 months, relocation stands head and shoulders above anything else that I've been able to accomplish this year, and really makes some of the stresses and sacrifices of this job worthwhile. Since the passing of this policy in February, we've received nonstop calls and emails from renters and landlords alike. Our office feels confident that this policy has absolutely made a difference in the lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of renters. While today's ordinance merely extends this policy another 6 months, I am committed to making it permanent and making it even more effective. I will continue to fight to end displacement and to stabilize renters through multiple strategies, but today this is the best we have, and we owe it to renters to make it the best it can be. Thank you to everyone who came today in the middle of a work day, or school day, or childcare-less day. I know it's really tough to come here in the middle of the day. Actually, it's not the middle. I wish it was the middle. It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I think it's a clear statement of need when renters take off time from work to make their voices heard. I want you to know I hear you, and I thank you for being here.
Very good. And folks, given the large number of people that have signed up for public testimony and acknowledging that people have to get back to work and other issues, let's limit testimony to 2 minutes apiece. My suspicion is with that many people, you will find some people are also making the same comments you are about these two policies. It's okay just to say, I agree with fill in the blank. Or you can say, I disagree with fill in the blank, and that'll help us speed things up. So I'd like to extend a courtesy for folks with disabilities, people with very young children who might like to speak. I also understand that Representative Hernandez is here, Casey Jama is here from Unite Oregon, and former State Rep Shamia Fagan are here. If you'd like to testify, we'd like to have you come up quickly as well.
Mayor, if I may,
Daly,
before
yes,
we
please.
hear. I have an amendment to offer for item 1088. It is to remove language in the code that allows an exemption on relocation payments for owners who rent only one unit in the city of Portland.
I will,
Commissioner moves. Commissioner
Mayor, I'll
Daly.
second it for purpose of discussion.
Commissioner Fish seconds the amendment for purposes of discussion.
And Mayor, I have a proposed friendly amendment to the amendment. I think I was the original author of this exemption, and in my statement in support of it, I explained that the council had put accessory dwelling units into a special category. We had made special efforts to create incentives for people to build them and maintain them, and we had exempted them from a lot of our rules. So I thought, consistent with that, we should put them in an exemption. I have met with some of the advocates and other folks who care about this issue, and I'm persuaded that the one dwelling unit exception has had unintended consequences. And I think in effect, it's a loophole that needs to be closed, but I still believe that accessory dwelling units deserve a protection because the council has said so consistently that we want to encourage them. And I think it's a identifiable and separate class of occupancy that we can address. So my friendly amendment, which I'm going to hand out, simply, in lieu of striking one dwelling unit from 30.01.085B, replaces it with in only, quote, a single accessory dwelling unit, end quote. So we would limit the exemption strictly to a single accessory dwelling unit, and I would offer that as a friendly amendment to the Daly amendment.
Commissioner?
Commissioner, thank you, and thank you for acknowledging that perhaps we didn't know or consider enough the impact of that original exemption. I agree with maintaining the owner-occupied rule, and I believe ADUs would be included in that. So I just want to be clear, though, ADUs would be exempted, but also owner-occupied shared housing would remain an exemption. Is that?
So to speed this along, she's rejecting your offer.
Well,
Would
I'm
you
not
like to-
rejecting, I'm trying to clarify it, because currently, the only exception to relo is when a rental unit is shared with the owner, it's owner-occupied.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is, it absolutely is. And where an ADU is called an accessory dwelling unit because it is attached as an accessory to that home.
The
So-
owner occupancy requirement is not affected by my friendly amendment.
Okay.
May I just ask a clarifying question as a sponsor? Is this an issue that's being discussed in the committee looking at the permanent rules?
It very well may be, but that committee was set up as a technical advisory committee, and this is a policy decision.
Well, let me be clear. I would like this issue to be on the table for people to address in testimony. It is the council's will how we dispose of the amendment. So I would like to invite, if people want to address this, I would like to hear, and then the council decides whether we're going to take it up today or at some later date.
If I might just further comment, illustrates the reason that we were putting this off to the committee, because there's multiple variations of the amendment already, and it is a more complicated issue, as evidenced by apparently I don't understand the ordinance that was passed.
So why
I think-
don't we do this in the interest of moving this along? Because we have a lot of people who'd like to testify. And Commissioner Fritz, I just want to publicly state that is my preference. I believe we should honor the process we put into place. We established a reload committee for the purpose of evaluating these kinds of proposals. They are coming back in December with the permanent strategy, and it would be my recommendation that this go to that committee for further evaluation and recommendation to the City Council in December. However, let's have both of these issues on the table here today. Let's hear from the public
So
on these issues.
I don't think that your amendment was seconded. I'd like to second the Fish amendment.
So Commissioner Fish moves, Commissioner Daly seconds. So we now have two amendments on the table, and we'll now open it up to public testimony. 2 minutes each, please.
I have Holly Hansen, who requested to go early, and if anybody else with, oh, I'm sorry, Mayor, did you have some other people you said you wanted to go first?
If any of the individuals that I called up are here and they want to go early.
So they are here. Mayor, Representative Diego Hernandez is here.
And I see Shamia here. Very good.
I think you said Casey Jama.
Casey's here. Good.
He's here.
Come on up.
Shamia Fagan is here.
And anybody with disabilities, children who'd like to go early, please just let the clerk know and we'll accommodate you.
Could I wait?
Sure.
If I didn't check my oxygen, I'm in good shape.
Okay, just let us know.
But if I run into trouble, left hand.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Good morning.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Mayor Wheeler, City Commissioners, for the record, my name is Diego Hernandez. I'm a state representative for House District 47 in East Portland, representing neighborhoods like Gateway, Hazelwood, Rosewood, and other East Portland neighborhoods. In my district, families are finding it harder and harder to pay for rent as prices increase and as more and more folks get displaced. Rents continue to increase and families continue to be forced with difficult decisions. Should I take on this 20% rent increase or move further away? Should I pay rent or my phone bill this month? Should I report the black mold and risk being evicted? This is an emergency, and we need to continue to do everything we can to improve the experiences of renters and families who are experiencing housing instability. In February of this year, you all mandated that landlords in the city of Portland pay relocation assistance to tenants experiencing rent increases of 10%. We are asking you that to lower it to 5%. Thank you for your efforts here at the local level. While we tried to do something with HB 2004 and we failed, we're optimistic that we could continue to do something at the state level. It is reassuring to hear that while extension is through April, Council will be voting on a permanent policy later this year, but the time is now and we are here to ask for permanent changes today. We need to close the loophole like you all were talking about. I'd urge you to lift the exemption now so that all tenants have the assurance and relocation assistance. Also, with the commitment of developing a hardship appeals program at the 6-month review for these landlords experiencing edge cases, we ask that the city base any future or current exemptions on data. And speaking of data, also tracking how many landlords are paying the relocation assistance. We ask that the city immediately invest in outreach and education to get the word out. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. We appreciate your being here.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is, for the record, my name is Casey Chama. I'm the Executive Director of Unite Oregon. Thank you so much for having us today here. I'm here to speak and urge you to make the rent relocation assistance ordinance permanent and also to consider expanding the protection offered by this policy. I think we know that we have housing crisis in our hand, and our community, particularly low-income community of color, immigrant refugees, are especially impacted. I also emphasize that the city of Portland must take rent relocation assistance ordinance permanent now with 6-month review. Why permanent? Because we know the problem is not going away. It's getting worse, and we don't want to have to come every few months to push this policy forward. We also urge you that the city must lower the rent increase limit from 10% to 5%. Why? Because people are not only receiving increases in their cost of rent, they are receiving increases in transportation costs, food costs, medical costs. It costs more just to be alive. These increases are not keeping pace with the Portlanders' paychecks. Something has to give. Please do something. The city of Portland also must remove small landlord exemptions. In order to extend alternatives this equal protection, let me be clear, renters who speak English are having a hard time to navigate this system. Imagine if you don't speak English. It's a very, very complex system, and I think we have to close the loophole. With that said, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to be working with you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your being here. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler, members of the council. For the record, my name is Shamia Fagan, former state representative for House District 51, which included a large portion of East Portland, east of 122nd. In 1997, my brother was driving us on I-84 to East Portland to see my mom for the first time in many years. We were being raised by a single parent in Eastern Oregon. My dad and my mom had been struggling with addiction and had been on and off the streets living in East Portland. But she finally had a home and had invited us to come see her. So I remember my brother pulled up to this big, beautiful Victorian-style house with a huge wraparound porch. And we were thinking, whoa, Mom, nice house. And she gave us a hug and walked us around to the front steps. But instead of walking up the steps, she dropped down to her hands and knees and she crawled under the porch and then invited us into her home. And my brother and I dropped down to our hands and knees and we crawled under the porch behind her. And she had a sleeping bag unzipped to cover the dirt floor, and we spent the day with her there. And like many people experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness, my mom didn't drive around with a U-Haul. So she showed us the one box that she kept with her, which is full of pictures of us and letters from us. I know through your courageous leadership that you took in February that you know what I know, which is that everybody struggling to make a home or keep a home, that's somebody's somebody. That's somebody's mom, that's somebody's nana, that's somebody's friend, that's somebody's brother or uncle or son. So we're here today to ask you to make these changes permanent because these folks need you to not let the rug be pulled out from under them and be concerned that this might expire, this might sunset. We need these changes to be permanent, and we ask you to make those changes today. Do you want to add anything?
Out like
Thank
a
you.
light. Out like a light. Thank you. We appreciate it. It's good seeing you. Next three, please.
We have some people with disabilities. We have Holly Hansen, and I believe we have two more from the other room who came over.
Very good. Good morning.
Oh, hi. My name is Holly Hansen. I live 6 blocks from here, and I represent the next wave of 5,000 newly homeless people. I live in a subsidized Portland tax credit, Section 42 apartment, and I pay $609 a month rent. It's a regular building, but the units by the trash closet or the elevators that are kind of more undesirable get the tax credit discount. And I'm permanently disabled with a neurological condition, and many of my neighbors are disabled and elderly. Many are young people just starting their careers. We all have been paying our $609 a month. We've been background checked and credit checked. And last month, my leasing agent told me at my rent renewal that the landlord has to reapprove the subsidy that I'm getting for my apartment every 15 years. And then she started in with a hard sell that I should pay $1,200 a month when the subsidy expires because it's better than being on the street. And that was her quote. My subsidy can be ended in 11 years. I have $260 a month, every month, on average, in unreimbursed medical expenses. So $1,200 a month rent is not sustainable. When I moved in, I was told that it was a 100-year subsidy starting when the building was built, which was around 1994. So I planned on having it for 80 years. I spent $5,000 moving here to be with my only daughter in the town of my grandmother's relatives. The apartment was worth $750 per month 5 years ago. Now the landlord can get $1,200. There are 40 units like mine in my building, and we all will need new apartments suddenly. I have a list from Oregon Housing and Community Services, and by my count, there are 112 apartment buildings in Portland, and if each one of those has 40 units, I got my calculator out, and that could be 5,000 new homeless people like me who did nothing wrong. I'm a volunteer, you know, I'm leading a stable life. And so I'm here today trying to stave that off. No one I know has a room for me to rent. I can't do more than a half-hour transit ride due to my disability. I need to live close to my daughter so that she can work and care for me as I age. And I'm just looking for more incentives. I don't want my landlord to find out I was here today and get him mad at me. But I'm hoping that they need more incentives, that clearly they want to dump this program. And I don't have the numbers of how many people this will displace, because I don't know if they have more than 40 units, but I'm guessing maybe it's 4,000 people that are going to be the next wave. And then I also am trying to help a friend of mine who is Susan Samuel. She's the caregiver for Jane Sandel, and her husband is Charlie. They're in Portland. They get $1,100 Social Security for the two of them a month, and they're like 85 and 86. Their rent was $998 a month. Now, they've lived in their apartment 17 years, but now their rent went up to $1,370 a month, which is, you know, $372 more than their Social Security. And Charlie is 86 and has had 2 strokes and is deaf. Jane is 85, partially blind, partially paralyzed. They need to be close to their doctors. That's an issue for me. And their apartment is all the way out at Stark and 190th Street, and they still have gang activity there. And she mentioned that it's owned by Templeton. And I have the list. I made copies of everything I said today, and I have the list of the tax credit apartments from the Oregon Housing.
Great, thank you.
And if I could be directed who to give my documentation to.
If you could give it to Carla right there, we'd appreciate it. And she'll make
Okay.
sure we get copies of all of it, and that it's entered into the record.
Good, and I'm just here doing what I can, and if there's anyone in the room today that can help direct me. My disability is all-consuming. I really need time to get back to my health and all of that, but I can't afford to lose my rent and be on the street, so I'm taking time out to fight for my rent.
Wonderful. And we appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I give what?
Very good. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Me?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. My name is Cora Mason, and my family and I have lived at 5819 Apartments since June 2nd of 2015. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on March 5th, 2016. Our rent there in that 2-bedroom started out at $1,350 plus electricity each month and was increased to $1,375. On September 14th, 2017, I received notification via stuck outside our apartment door of a rent increase that is at the end of my November 30th, 2017 lease. That's when it ends. The paperwork includes that my rent will increase from $13.75 plus electricity to $15.12 per month, which is a 9.997% increase. Okay? And then, in addition to that, there will be $20 monthly for garbage and an unknown fluctuating amount for water and sewer each month. They don't know how much it is yet. Okay? So I was never charged before for water, garbage, or sewer. I have no idea of the possible total of these items, and I do know I can't afford these increases. Yet I have no money saved up to relocate my 2 grandsons and my daughter. My daughter's 6-year-old son is autistic. He attends Jason Lee School, where he is in a group with other autistic children. He is doing extremely well. And to move him out of the group due to moving somewhere out of the community, it would be a tragedy and a travesty. Each one of us living in this family group has a disability and/or challenges of some kind. Earlier this year, I had an operation to remove a cancer, and I also had hip replacement surgery. It is also discovered that I have atrial fibrillation, for which I have been prescribed Eliquis, which has a $400 a month copay. I became disabled back in 2003 following open heart surgery. My heart stopped working and I was given last rites. Fortunately, after being able to summons an on-call or cardiologist who was able to turn the situation around, I am still here. However, it is not without the damaging side effects of the incident. My daughter has a number of medical challenges, as well as my oldest grandson. We have nowhere to turn for money to relocate, yet we cannot afford these unfair monthly increases, and we certainly do not want to be homeless.
Thank you.
Can't
Appreciate
imagine
it.
carting my family around all over.
No way. Thank you, and we're glad your health has improved. Thank you.
Can I just comment on that? I really appreciate you pointing out that there's a way to get around the 10% by adding on fees that you never had to pay before. So I would suggest that's something that when we get to the permanent rules, we should include something about that.
Thank you.
Hi,
Good
folks.
morning.
I'm Johnny Shaver. I work in housing and homelessness in Montevilla, and also in Vancouver with Share. But I was here in February to testify about how no-cause evictions were harming my neighborhood. But I'm here today to tell you how they're harming me. 1 week after testifying in February, I received a no-cause eviction. I have no way to prove that it was retaliatory, but I can tell you that it displaced 3 generations of my family as I take care of my mother and my 8-year-old child, and my stepfather at that time. I was not able to get renters relocation because my landlord situation was probably not unique, but interesting. My house was technically owned by a woman in her mid-90s. Her son managed the estate, and while she only owned the 1 rental property, he has about half a dozen. He was responsible for the sale of the house. He brought a real estate agent into my home, but would not identify him as a real estate agent to me. It was very awkward to have folks walking through my house and have no idea who they were. This has been a huge hit for my family. Without the connections that I have made in my community, I would not have housing right now, because I do work in housing and homelessness, and the irony is not lost on me that I cannot afford housing otherwise without the connections I've made in my community. So I'm here today to ask that the relocation ordinance be extended and that the loophole be closed. My landlord made $375,000 on a house that they've owned since 1950. It was all profit for him, and it was all hardship for me. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Next 3, please.
We have one more, someone with a child.
Oh,
And then
sorry.
we'll go
Very
with
good.
Alan Kessler and Sean Jillians. Can come on up now. And then they'll be followed by Nicole Phillips, Craig Rogers, and Wayne W.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning. My name is Megan Dorton, and I'm here today to talk to you about my experience as a landlord and to express my support of our renter protections and the expansion and continuance of the relocation ordinance, and to ask that the council close the small landlord loophole. So as I said, I'm a landlord. I have a property in Northwest Portland, also in Northeast Portland in Montavilla. And when I found out I was pregnant with this one, my family and I decided that we were going to move from our home in Montavilla down to the next neighborhood in Foster Powell. We found, we were looking for some home that was bigger and was closer to a low-traffic pathway to school for our soon-to-be kindergartner. And we looked and we found a place, and it was great. It was perfect down the street from the library. It was wonderful. And so we moved because we wanted to. We gave ourselves a lot of time, and we had the money to do it. And it was hell. It was a nightmare. Moving was very, very difficult, even under these great circumstances. And I mention that because for my two tenants, their situations were also had to move before they rented with me, and their situations weren't quite as great. They were forced to move, both of my households, without cause, and they were left facing. Not only losing their home, but losing their neighborhoods. Their kindergartners couldn't go to the school of their choice. Their kindergartners would have to move and change schools. And for them, it was utter chaos. And months for one tenant and years for the other, these households are still facing the legacy of financial difficulties from having to move without sufficient notice and without sufficient means to do so. Now, in both of these cases, they moved prior to the relocation ordinance being in effect, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway because they were small landlords. So I'm asking you to please consider the effect of the small landlord loophole on the tenants themselves. They are not, though their landlords might be smaller, the effects of them are just as great and powerful on their lives as for other tenants. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning, Mayor. Members of the council, for the record, Sean Jillians, registered lobbyist representing the Oregon Association of Realtors.
Folks, excuse me, I'm sorry.
As much as
excuse me. I want to remind people what I said up front, that not everybody is going to have the same opinion. Please just do this or do this. Let's be respectful of everybody here, regardless of their opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, speaking on the relocation segment of this, it was interesting in listening to sort of the emergency that we're facing in the housing community. That's something that's really been years in the making. We have been seeing a serious lack of supply for over a decade in the Portland metro region as far as keeping up with just our existing folks coming in. And then when you add on the immigration, because Portland has become so popular, you fall further and further behind. And our state economist has pointed out that we're tens of thousands of units a year behind and increasing. And I point that out simply to say that when you all make decisions, there are sometimes unintended consequences. And when you hear stories about people who are deciding to take institutional money to other places, not building here because they're concerned about the regulatory environment, or you hear stories about small landlords, and in particular, the one exception, you hear a lot of small landlords who have a single family residence, they're selling them now. And that was one of the concerns we raised in February, is that people would just get to the point of saying, you know what, it's not worth owning that anymore. And that property is no longer available for a single family rental. We've seen a considerable uptick in the number of those units that are now on the market. And you're also seeing a decline in actual single family rentals that are available for folks. Those folks who might have a family, want more space, don't necessarily want to live in an apartment. So as you move forward and look at permanent decisions, I would hope that your technical advisory committee looks at policy as well, not just we already have the end in mind, which is sort of how the original ordinance was crafted, and then input was sought afterwards, that you would look at sort of what the consequences are of the decisions that you make if you're actually going to have the opposite impact that you all are looking for, which ultimately is what we're all looking for, which is significant increase in the supply, which will ultimately drive down some of the costs.
So Mayor, can I just ask a question?
Commissioner Fish.
I'd love to see whatever data you have on this, so if you can supply it to us, and I'll just give you one example. For 20 years, I lived in Hollywood, and my next-door neighbor bought her bungalow, perfectly nice, two-bedroom home in the 70s for about $40,000. She was a legal secretary, she raised her family, she had a tenant, she was a great neighbor. She ended up selling her bungalow at the beginning of the market uptick to a developer for about $400,000. Under our rules, we allowed the developer to take it down but keep the foundation, put a monster house on the lot, and sell it for $800,000. So one of the questions that I want to drill down on and look at your data is it the city council's regulations which you think are driving these decisions, or the fact that we're in an unprecedented market where people can make just the kinds of profits on the sale of homes were unimaginable 10 years ago? But I look forward to seeing your data.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Fish, I think it's not just decisions that are made at the city council level that are driving the cost of dirt up to such a level that you're talking about, where someone could purchase effectively a lot for $400,000 to build that new home on. That's effectively what they're doing when they're tearing down that bungalow. Our statewide land use system, by constraining development, is going to drive up the costs, and you have areas in the city of Portland now that where raw dirt without any services is going for $1.2 million an acre. So when you're looking at that cost, there's no way you're ever going to have an affordable unit on there, because by the time you pay your SDCs and you put the sticks and bricks on there, the house is going to have to be in the $500,000 range.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. I had some testimony, but I think I'll make it really quick so I can get to some points about the amendments. I'm an attorney. I've worked some pro bono matters for relocation. I've helped tenants get paid under relocation. I want to support Commissioner Udaley's amendment. It's really hard to figure out, especially with the new rules, nested ownership and the structure of ownership. This is my job. I'm really good at it. I am particularly good at research. I have an impossible time figuring out what the ownership interests are. So the way the current rules are, they throw some tenants completely under the bus if they have a dishonest landlord. As for the amendments, I support both amendments, either amendment. I'd like to point out, though, that the current language, so this is 30.01.085B, says that the requirements do not apply to tenants that occupy the same dwelling unit as the landlord. In the next sentence, it also says that the requirements do not apply to a landlord that only owns one dwelling unit. So those are separate sentences. And I would imagine that Commissioner Udaley's amendment was to strike that second sentence, leave the first sentence in place, which would preserve the exemption for people who live in the dwelling unit. Now, dwelling unit is interesting. In that same section, this is still 30.01.085B. Later in the paragraph, it says, for purposes of the exception, dwelling unit is defined by PCC 33910. Under 33910, dwelling unit references residential structure types. It just says see residential structure types. And there, accessory dwelling units is listed. So are triplexes, duplexes, et cetera. There's one more point of code, and it sounds like I'm about to run out of time. But 33.207.040B2 explicitly allows a owner to treat the ADU as part of the residence, so they can live on either side. That doesn't really match the language of the code, and I think that that should be resolved. But I would say that you could simply define the ADU as the same dwelling unit and leave Commissioner Udaley's amendment in place exactly.
Can you submit that in an email just to us?
Absolutely.
And
That's very helpful.
Could you repeat your name again, please?
My name's Alan Kessler.
Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Obviously, there are a lot of things to consider.
Thank you, all three of you. We appreciate it. Next three, please.
Are Nicole Phillips, Craig Rogers, and Wayne W., and they will be followed by Marianne Drake, Mona Corvash, and Joe Walsh.
Good morning. Do you want to go ahead and start, sir?
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's convenient to point the finger at the developers and the politicians and whatnot. Out of respect for that, I should probably apologize to half the politicians and representatives in this room. But sometimes people can be their own worst enemy. Metaphorically speaking, if you wanted to bury everybody in this room, you wouldn't need to do much more than exactly what they're asking you to do. Trying to give everybody their own individual private unit, whether they can afford it or not only is a source of much economic inequality, but it's also been tried a number of times before with questionable results. More concerning to me is that owning your own individual unit has become the American standard. And if you can't meet that standard, then God help you, because there's no other options out there. Relying on government funds to keep a roof over our head, that is a sad testament to those before us, some of which who died for the sake of individual liberty. And yes, I believe liberty is tied to who pays your bills. Alternatively, smaller, isolated, and claustrophobic units, increasingly smaller units, they're good options to have, but they're not for everybody. So once again, what I always come here for, large-scale bunk housing, pod hostels, these forms of infrastructure being made on the monthly rental market with no strings attached. These are options we should at least explore before throwing all of our eggs in a government-funded basket or locking ourselves in closets. Privacy is good, but a rental market monopolized by physical privacy is not so good. The shelter model and charitable institutions in general are flawed concepts, as they implicitly assume that individual liberty is an expendable thing. And the majority of people end up paying the price for a few bad apples in those places. I mean, you got to wonder why they cut off access throughout the day, and people, you know, all these things. A lot of people don't know what shelters are like, but they're not humane alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Phillips. I'm speaking, of course, in support of permanentizing the relocation ordinance. I'll do this quickly. So in volunteering with a local social service organization, I ran into a family that was there for services because they'd spent the last of their money on a used car. They'd done this because, of course, they need to pick up extra shifts and things because they'd had a massive rent increase. The car was also Plan B in case they couldn't continue to pay the rent. They'd have a place to sleep at least. Because of the massive amount of power given to property owners here, there are people paying more than half of their income to rent. Terrified that they're going to receive that next rent increase. That's just going to be too much. Or they're scared of a no-cause eviction, knowing that they don't have the thousands of dollars, and I mean thousands of dollars that it's going to take to move. The emergency relocation ordinance was a good first step in reducing that power balance. However, if we're serious about protecting tenants and fostering a city that is accessible to everyone, there are several things that we need to do. The first, of course, is making this ordinance permanent. I've heard the discussions, and I'm very happy to hear that you are in support of making that permanent. And I'm sure that, obviously, part of that was realizing that it worked. There are fewer of these massive increases. Fewer people are getting those no-cause evictions. Require property owners, obviously, to inform tenants about relo. That seems like a no-brainer, but obviously knowledge is power. And if you don't want to pay it out, you're not going to tell people about it. Remove the small landlord exemption. A property owner's investment property is a tenant's home. I don't mind, I guess we've discussed about a means-based exemption, but obviously, quite honestly, if you're concerned about your investment, maybe don't gouge your tenants for their rent or no cause evict them because they've become inconvenient. I also want to lower that trigger, like everyone else, from 10% to 5%. Number one, hearing things like 9.998, that's just evil. It really is. I don't know how anyone can do something so unconscionable. The other thing is that I spoke with the landlord at the Hawthorne Street Fair. nice enough guy. He wanted an explanation as to why he should consider people when he's talking about his investment property. And one of the things that he said was that at 9.9%, he could regularly raise the rent and still be where he wanted to be, regardless of what happened to the people that he was renting to. So, thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to creating more ways to make this a city where we can all live, work, and play.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Craig Rogers, and I support these proposals before you today. I live in East Portland. I live across from the East Portland Community Center, Floyd Light Middle School, and East Portland Police Precinct. You'd think I wouldn't have any problem, but there's a heavily treed area right across from them. So I'll be speaking from my personal experience of that area. So the face of homelessness, what I see there, it's a woman with a black eye and a bloody nose. And I will be drawn to out in front of my house, and there's a woman that has the courage to leave her abusive partner, and she's sitting on the neighbor's hillside, and he's threatening to dump her cart with all her belongings in it. And that's the face of homelessness I want you to remember, because we need to solve these things. We need to create stability, and I've heard that word mentioned, and you're right on point with that, and I appreciate that. We need to understand that to a large degree, homelessness and heroin go hand in hand, and we need to seriously address that. We need people who are passionate and pay attention to detail. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Marion Drake, Mona Corvash, and Joe Walsh, and they'll be followed by Lightning, Betty Holliday, and Margot Black.
Mr. Walsh, would you like to start?
Good morning. My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. Find myself agreeing with the City Council. Find myself also acknowledging the superb work that Commissioner Udaley did on this, and the council for allowing it to happen, because even though the idea is great, you still need 3 votes. So congratulations on your diplomacy. Congratulations on what you're doing and the amendments. We see our position on most of these items as a counter to what you're doing. We look at the negative side. Rarely do we get an opportunity to look at the positive side, and this seems to be really positive. You want to extend it 18 months, which is really good. We would also point out that we take some exception about the first year of the extension. And we realized you had an election, you had new people coming in, it was very confusing, so it ate up a lot of time. But on this one, we want you to do more. We don't want to lose people on the street this year. And if we do, and the coroner comes out like last year and says they shouldn't have died, that if we did something more, they would have lived, we will come here and we will yell at you. And I don't get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday to get thrown out of here, believe it or not. I have other interesting things to do than get thrown out of City Hall. So again, congratulations. I would take an exception to the 2-minute rule. People write their speeches. They take time off from work. You have to understand that. When I write speeches, and I don't do it very often, it's 3 minutes. I time it. So when you knock it down to 2, it throws everything up in the air, and that's unfair. You know, I can get past it because I've done this so many times now, I can do it off the top of my head most times. But people that come to you for the first time, they write them out. They time them. So you should honor that. And I noticed that you're not doing the 2-minute rule stringently. You're giving people extra time, and I congratulate you on that. That's a very human connection, all right? But I've gone on too long saying nice things about you, and you're ruining my reputation.
I was going to say, yeah, and I want to acknowledge that. And there's a balancing act here. I do want to be respectful of people's testimony, but it is very hard for us to predict in advance exactly how many people are going to want to come and testify. And 43 is a large number, so we combined the two ordinances to help speed it up so people wouldn't have to come up twice, they could leave. But the reality is we also have a jam-packed city council agenda for the entirety of the day. So as important as this subject is, there's lots of equally important issues that are also coming before the council, and we want to make sure that we get to those. So that's the tension. But thank you, sir.
When many people show up, you should be excited.
We are.
That's democracy.
Yeah, it's great, and it is, and it's it is a trade-off, and it's a real one. And as the presiding officer, it's my responsibility.
Do better on a trade-off.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and council. My name is Marion Drake. I support the statements of Representative Hernandez and Mr. Casey Jama that rent increases lower to 5% to make the reload permanent. I live in Section 42 tax credit housing, which has increased the retail rent 13% in 18 months. I also recommend that the city make a resolution or a recommendation, whatever you call it, to set an example for the state to have rent control and end no-cause eviction. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Mona Korvash. I live in an apartment in Southwest Portland. I've lived there for about 4.5 years. When I moved in, my rent was $6.95, and then the rent increases started a little over a year ago. Usually it's always been $100 at a time. So my rent is now $995. I'm disabled and on Social Security, and my Social Security check is $1,200 a month. So with just other basic bills, it's like way more than I get in Social Security. If it wasn't for other help that I've been lucky enough to get, like emergency utility assistance in the food bank, I don't know what I would be doing right now. And even still, I've gone hungry and had my electricity turned off a couple of times. Usually, the neighbors right around my place, like there's different landlords, but when one of our rent gets raised, the others are quick to follow. And my neighbors recently had their rent raised just under the 10%. So I'm really worried because I don't know what I'll do if it gets raised anymore. The last raise that happened just after the reload rule was made, but I wasn't able to find out how to utilize the rule or the exact what it exactly said. So also education would be really helpful, because then by the time that I was able to find Portland Tenants United and figure it out, it was past the 15-day limit that was the rule at that time, and I was ineligible. So also, I agree with closing the small landlord loophole and with making it permanent. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Next three, please.
Our Lightning, Betty Holliday, and Margot Black, and they'll be followed by Julia DeGraw, Christina Dirks, and Dave King.
Margot, do you want to start us off, please?
Sure, yeah, I can. I was going to put something up on this computer.
Oh, okay. In that case, let's go to Lightning first. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning SuperWatchdog X. On the emergency designation, I do agree with that. but it's my understanding the governor stated not to use the state of emergency, so it would be called the city of emergency designation. I hope you check into that and hear back from the governor. Issue number 2 is that I'm absolutely against inclusionary zoning at this time. It needs to be looked at again. I think we're beginning to see developers place money in other locations, step away, step back. We need to correct that situation immediately. We're losing tremendous amount of jobs. And again, my position, and a lot of people may disagree with me, we need more housing units built. If you have 10 people and you have 5 housing units, they're going to pick and choose who gets it. People are going to lose out. We need to balance out the overall inventory. That will begin to see rents begin to stabilize and lower. We're seeing that up in Seattle. We're seeing that in some other locations. Watch real close on when you begin to keep building more inventory. The issue on this relocation policy, I would like it to expire. I would like it to be refined more. I think we're beginning that loophole statement to see the utility costs shifted over and added on and given to the tenants, which in turn is a rent increase, which will be no penalties. And all that's going to happen, these tenants are going to end up not being able to make their rent. They're going to have to move. That's not the direction we want. We're having too much of a battle between the landlords and the tenants. It has to stop. Stop this immediately. It's not good. It's not going to work. And issue number 3 is that from my position, we want to make sure that if you're going to step in, I want to see a pay raise moratorium put on your salaries. And also, I want to see you work on cutting your water fees, your sewer fees, your garbage fees, and understand that also drops down the rent, and you control that. I want more skin in the game, costs you more money, and guess what? You're going to build more units. And thank you very much, Mr. Salzman. That affordable housing bond, the best thing that ever happened to this city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Betty Holliday. I have a very personal story to tell. I am a renter here in the city of Portland. I felt compelled to take time off from work today to testify. I work with the Department of Human Services, and I'm a graduate of Willamette Law School. In the past 2.5 years, I will have moved 3 times, 2 of them due to no-cause evictions. I left a Beaverton home when my landlords wanted to sell it to pay for their children's education. Understandable. After living in a very small furnished cottage for 1.5 years, I found a larger house. The owner had rented to the prior tenants for a little over 2 years while he worked in New York. His plans were to keep working out of town. I paid all the concomitant costs associated with the move again. 10 months later, after doing some traveling, my landlord told me he was coming back to his house to live. My year's lease ends on October 31st. My take on the single unit landlords is that they, like all other landlords, should be considered to be in a business. I heard Oregon House Representative Mark Meek tell one landlord in a town hall that she needed to be a responsible landlord. I would say that message rings true for all landlords. My landlord didn't understand the fragility of tenant stability. I am now paying the price for that, literally and figuratively. The city of Portland needs to set the expectation that even a single unit landlord is running a business. As such, he or she must be prepared to pay any cost of that business, including relocation costs for any tenants they no-cause evict, period. There may be a myriad of ways to get there, but we need to get there sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Is it possible to put my picture up there? I don't know.
I think, yeah, there you go.
Great. I'm just really proud of it. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Margot Black. I'm an organizer with Portland Tenants United, which is registered to lobby with the city of Portland. I'm supposed to say that, right? Mm-hmm. So before I begin, first, I want to thank that Betty was able to take work off to be here to testify, but I want to call your attention to all those who are not able to be here today. PTU did a lot of outreach to the many tenants who have been impacted by this historic policy, those who've been able to stay in their housing, those who've been displaced with dignity, and also those who have been left out with the exemption. Many of these folks wanted to, but could not be here today because they are working. They're nurses, they're teachers, they're child care providers, they're bus drivers, they wait tables, they work at Safeway, they have sick kids. Being able to be here on a workday morning is a position of privilege, and I hope that the council realizes what voices are systematically left out in these hearings and how that underrepresentation is institutionalized by staffing commissions and advisory committees without those voices as well. One person who could not be here is Amanda Potter. After 11 years in her Mount Tabor courtyard apartment, her landlord declined to renew her lease, being upfront about wanting to remodel and re-rent for hundreds more. She moved to that apartment with her toddler after her former apartment of 10 years was converted to condos. So she's moved both with and without relocation and would have loved to be here to tell you what a difference it made, and also to tell you that even with relocation, she had to move 200 blocks away, and her daughter had to start middle school in a new city. And now as a Troutdale resident, she does not have that protection available. And Multnomah County has indicated to Portland Tenants United that it does not want to proceed with a relo policy until Portland has made theirs permanent. Portland's housing crisis doesn't end at our borders. $500 rent increases and no-cause evictions are becoming epidemic in Gresham. Cities and counties across the state need to see Portland demonstrate leadership on this policy by making it permanent today. I'm also here as a member of the Relocation Technical Advisory Committee to urge you to pass the amendment to protect all renters today. I want to remind you what relocation is for. It's not a fee or a fine. It is a real cost. I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep going. It's not a fee or a fine. It's a real cost that someone has to pay. If the landlord who chooses to force their tenants out doesn't pay it, then the tenant does, like Betty. It goes to application costs, double rent, security deposits, packing, moving, time off work, and childcare for all of the above. Time off work. Moving is expensive and traumatic, regardless of how many units your landlord owns. There are no protections, extra protections for small tenants. There are no discounts for tenants with small landlords. I'm not here to paint landlords as rich and greedy. I have no doubt that relocation might be a financial burden for some small landlords, but it is no less of a burden for their tenants. I know that they may be using their rental for retirement and to put their kids through college, but renters have kids in college too, and may someday want to retire. Our city, state, and country have failed us by tearing up the social safety net, but using renters to make up the difference isn't the answer. Please remember that these small landlords have something that their tenants don't: 2 homes. They are better off by every single metric than their tenants who own 0. And it makes no sense for the city to prioritize the financial security of those landlords over those with no financial security. Paying relocation will not force these landlords out of their homes and into their cars like the tenants who are denied it. I know you want to defer these questions to the relocation committee, but with all due respect, that's like deferring gun control and healthcare to Congress. There will not be consensus from a committee comprised of property managers and service providers. I am the only citizen activist on the committee, and only one, I believe, of 2 renters. But as a member of the committee, I would prefer to approach this question from the perspective of when should there be exemptions, why, and what does that process look like, rather than go back to the table with the bias of this hastily thought out exemption to fight about it. Ultimately, we need to try to balance the wish lists of landlords and renters. Or we do not need to try to balance the wish lists, but we need to think about the value and purpose of this policy. City Council needs to decide what the value of this policy is and legislate based on that today. The policy isn't meant to punish landlords. It is meant to prevent and mitigate the impacts of displacement. The exemption categorically and unjustifiably leaves out a huge population of renters without asking who those renters are or why they are better equipped to shoulder the burden of this unplanned and unpredictable cost.
Margot, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're going on 5 minutes. Are you coming to a conclusion?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will.
Thank you.
Why don't I just say this, that I did ask that question. We know that the vast majority of unprotected tenants are in single-family residences. According to some data I got from Metro yesterday, this is 25% of Portland's renter households. And this, and the people who live in the single-family residences are people with kids and pets, people with disabilities who need the accessibility of homes, seniors and renters doubling up.
As Betty stated, this is a business expense. It is reasonable for landlords who are business owners, and it must apply to all businesses, just like payroll taxes. Make this policy permanent today so renters can live without the anxiety of wondering, and education begin in earnest, and have the courage to legislate on the loophole today rather than hide behind the committee. Protect all renters and close the loophole.
Thank you.
And the next three are Julia DeGraw, Christina Dirks, and Dave King. And they'll be followed by Ethan Harrison, Adelpha Sanchez, and Mary Sipe.
How many more people are signed up?
After Dave King, I got 24 more.
Okay, folks, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I am the timekeeper. Let's try, I'm hearing a lot of the same points. Try to keep it as close to 2 minutes as possible, just so we can get through this and get to all of the business that we have on the agenda. Thank you. If you'd like to start, please.
All right. My name is Julia DeGraw, and I live in the Montevilla neighborhood, and I am a candidate for Portland City Council. First off, I'd like to just start by saying that everyone, regardless of their income, race, or ability, should not have to worry about whether or not they have a place to sleep at night, a safe home. It's time we started treating housing as the human right that it clearly is. We cannot live without food, water, and shelter. It's as simple as that. So I'm here today to advocate not just for an extension of the housing emergency, which is clearly necessary, and for making the relocation ordinance permanent, but to encourage the city to go further to ensure that housing becomes more affordable and accessible to Portlanders desperately trying to both live and work in the city we all love. But this simple goal is challenging or impossible for an increasing number of Portlanders to achieve at this time. One policy the city could pursue is a vacancy tax, which could tax landlords who allow hundreds of units in the city to lie vacant in hopes of charging ever higher rents. A vacancy tax would encourage landlords to charge affordable rents and provide housing for more people. Now and in the long term, we need more housing, which is affordable to all Portlanders. Revenues from a vacancy tax would allow city to spend money needed to preserve existing affordable housing and take housing stock out of the dog-eat-dog private market and place it into community-based ownership, which would lead to permanent affordability. Until a vacancy tax becomes a reality, and I believe it is not far off, there is something simple and moral the city council can do to help thousands of tenants citywide right now. You can make the relocation ordinance permanent and make sure it applies to all landlords, not just the large ones. A 10% rent increase is unjust, period. And so is a 9.9 or 9.8 rent increase. The family thrown into homelessness does not suffer more or less based on whether or not the landlord owns one or many units. This is why I urge you not only to extend the housing emergency, which clearly needs to happen, but that you make the relocation ordinance permanent and ensure that it applies to all landlords. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner. My name is Christina Dirks. I'm a staff attorney with Legal Aid Services of Oregon. I want to thank you all for your commitment to protecting renters from involuntary displacement. As a staff attorney at Legal Aid, we serve some of the lowest income folks in our community. My practice is solely in housing work. I represent low-income tenants in landlord-tenant matters and fair housing matters. I'm sure I don't need to tell you the statistics, but in Multnomah County, 136,000 people are at 100% of federal poverty guidelines, and we have roughly 1,200. To qualify for our services, someone has to make 1,200 a month or below. So we are dealing with very, very low-income individuals. Through my work at Legal Aid, I've observed the important and critical impact that the relocation ordinance has had. I staff our biweekly housing hotline where I talk to renters in crisis regularly. I would say before relocation ordinance passed, we would get a call about a no-cause notice, probably 1 in every 3 called. Since the passage of the relocation ordinance, we get very, very few calls about no-cause notices. We also get similarly very few calls about rent increases over 10% in the city of Portland. Unfortunately, we get all too many calls about 9.99% increases and that such. I have tons of case examples I can give you about the impact of relocation, but in the interest of time, I think I will just say to you that this ordinance should be made permanent in that it provides critical financial, educational, and emotional support for folks facing involuntary displacement. And I also wanted to express my support for the proposed amendment to lift the single landlord exemption. I'm sure you're going to hear from numerous landlords that will speak about their inability to afford relocation assistance. The fact is that tenants living in homes owned by small landlords are even less likely to be able to afford the cost of relocation. The policy rationale for this ordinance is to shift the significant cost of relocation from a landlord to a tenant who is being involuntarily displaced due to no fault of their own. So council should really consider a policy decision from the perspective of not of which landlords can afford to pay it, but rather from the perspective of whether a tenant should be excluded from receiving relocation. I have advised numerous tenants, I apologize, I will finish real quick. I've advised numerous tenants of their ineligibility to obtain relocation assistance solely on this loophole. And I can tell you it is heartbreaking to witness tenants feel like have the rug pulled out from under them, not only the first time when they got the no-cause notice or the rent increase that they can't afford, but the second time when they're told they can't obtain relocation, and they had no knowledge when they are renting a place whether their landlord owns more than one place or not, let alone can they usually do the research to find out whether their landlord owns one unit or more. And the other point I just want to make quickly is that many of our most valuable tenants in the community are renting from small landlords who only own one unit. These vulnerable tenants include individuals on fixed incomes who are renting rooms in houses with other tenants. They include folks that have barriers on their rental background that makes it impossible for them to qualify under screening criteria for some of the larger complexes in town, so they're living in mom and pop landlords' houses. I think there's also an important race equity consideration at play here that we need to talk about, which is that many of our tenants of color and our immigrant tenants are renting homes from small landlords due to family size, doubling up, and living with extended family.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Dave King, and my sweet wife and I have been landlords since the mid-'70s. We have 3 houses right near our house in St. John's, and the income from those houses is our retirement. Our renters like us. We keep the rent low, and when something needs to be fixed, I'm right there. People feel they have a good deal, so they don't want to move, which is good for us because turnovers are a lot of work and expensive. We don't need to raise the rent much, so 10% or 5% is totally doable for us. That's fine. By the way, we support the ordinance and the amendment and like to make it permanent. There have been a couple times when we've had to evict people. The first time was a person who seemed to be using meth. He was building a shop in the basement and got busy and removed a post that supported the central wall, which supported the ridge of the house. He stopped paying rent because he said little worms were crawling out of the walls and embedding themselves in his arms. When no one was looking, they'd stick their heads up and look around. And that's why he stopped paying the rent. When we told him he'd have to pay the rent or move, little bugs or not, he got a lawyer, so we had to get a lawyer. And it took a couple months. There were 2 hearings. His girlfriend went to the first one, but he never showed for the second. And after they moved before the sheriff came. It was no fun, but it only took a couple months and a few $100s, and that's totally doable. There was another time when people just stopped paying the rent. So, yeah, I said that we're supportive of what's before the council right now. We think it's terrible what's happening to renters in Portland. They need a lot more relief than this. The rental market's way out of control. We think it's up to the city to step in and regulate the banks and the landlords that are pricing people out of the city. The whole town's gentrifying, and you need to stop it. Mortgage rates and rents need to be controlled.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, all 3 of you. Next 3, please.
Are Ethan Harrison, Adelpha Sanchez, and Mary Sipe, and they'll be followed by Mike Adera, Michael Hawkins, and Tony Tape.
Hi, my name is Ethan Harrison. My pronouns are they and them. I'd just like to note Well, I'm an organizer with Portland Tennis United. It's still unfortunate that the balcony is closed under the auspices of security, and that's really a shame. We should be able to have more people out there. I also was able to enter through the turnstiles today that Mayor Hales so thankfully removed, but I just want to note personally that's really unfortunate, having been at those city council meetings that you used as the guys to put those in. We should really have them taken away. A few notes from myself, and then I have testimony to read from Alicia Marie, who's a worker and resident tenant in Northeast Portland. As we've heard today, 10% is way too much, and landlords can get around it. It really should be 5% as well. Unfortunately, Commissioner Fritz is not here, but the technical advisory committee that is being cited as the reason to not pass this today is, as Margot noted, literally full of people who, as per the 2 meetings that I attended, throw around numbers in the millions. They're not representative of the community at all, and we really need to do more with regard to equity on those technical advisory committees. So pass it today, right? Like, come back with amendments in December, but pass it today, you can do it. So as I mentioned, I'll read some testimony that was submitted by Alicia Marie. She is a worker as well and wasn't able to be here today. She offered this at the technical advisory committee that informed this ordinance. Shaky breath. She says, in January 2017, I received an email from my landlord giving me 90 days notice to find a new place to live. I wasn't a stranger to this situation as I had received a no-cause eviction just 6 months prior. Having to move twice in less than 1 year has been very taxing on me, both emotionally and financially. She writes, I wasn't able to afford the rental application fees and several $1,000s in deposits, so I accrued a lot of credit card debt during that time. In both no-cause evictions, my rental units were owned by people who didn't consider themselves landlords. They purchased a second home to give them income as an investment for when the housing market picked up. Both of my landlords expressed sympathy for the situation that their tenants were now facing. However, each landlord also made almost triple the price that they initially paid for their home. So why did they get a pass from City Hall to no-cause evict me without any financial repercussions? When I learned of the tenant relocation ordinance, I thought there might be some relief. I would have made my move more accessible and lessen the unexpected burden I was facing. Unfortunately, the current protections don't apply to small landlords like mine, or many of my friends who have faced evictions as well. She goes on to say that she would like for the single exemption to be removed. I look up and the mayor has taken leave. And I stand in solidarity with her and with the previously cited amount of Portland renters who would be positively affected. And Commissioner Fritz, good to see you. I was noting that we shouldn't hide behind the Technical Advisory Committee because it is ill representative of our community. Having attended 2 meetings, there were only, as Margot noted, 2 renters on the committee, and the rest are people who are millionaires and or their representatives. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I'll try and put this all concisely together. I definitely support the ordinance to extend the housing emergency, but I do have some concerns in that when I look around and I see how many people are still on the streets in tents, I feel like we're sticking our finger in a hole in the dike that this big round, and it's like water in a balloon. We fix it here and it pops out over there. And so what that makes me think about is why is this? Why is it no matter what we do, it's not enough? There's still people out there. And there's a couple of things that concern me, and I've talked about this before. I live in Section 42 housing, and I've shared with you how one of my concerns is that there are people living in Section 42 housing, the building where I live, who actually no longer meet the financial limits. One individual in particular who actually owns a condominium, and she rents out that condominium, and it's not considered income. She actually bragged to me how when her tenants moved out, she made some improvements, and now she's getting more rent for it. I think we need to look very hard at the people that are currently living in these buildings, and if they don't qualify financially, they need to go. It used to take about 6 to 9 months on the waiting list to get into the building that I live in. It now takes 3 to 4 years. There are 350 people on the waiting list in the building where I live. we're not going to have another 350 units overnight. It's going to be another 2 years before we have those. Quickly, I want to reiterate what the very first person, Holly Hansen, talked about, and that is the danger of people like myself who are on fixed incomes, who have only source of income is Social Security. And when they decide that this building no longer is going to be Section 42, what happens to those people? I think we need to put all of these buildings into a pool and one waiting list. And if you're getting kicked out of a building like Holly is because they're no longer going to make that commitment that they made, then you go to the top of the waiting list and for all of the buildings that are there. And just one quick thing. I know I'm running out of time.
You have run out of time.
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenos días, señores del jurado.
Good morning, members of the council.
Y personas que nos acompañan.
And all of those who are here accompanying us.
Mi nombre es Adelfa Sánchez.
My name is Adelfa Sanchez.
Tengo a mi esposo y 3 hijos.
I have a husband and 3 children.
Yo vengo aquí porque estoy apoyando la ley de asistencia para mudanza.
And I'm here to support the ordinance for relocation assistance.
Que protege a los inquilinos de Portland.
That protects Portland tenants.
Nosotros fuimos apoyados por esta ley.
We were supported by this law.
Y les pedimos a ustedes que tienen el poder.
And I ask those of you who have the power
que sigan apoyándonos con esta ley,
that you continue to support us with this ordinance,
ya que es de gran ayuda para todas las personas.
because it's a great help for all people.
Sufrimos de una propiedad, casa o apartamento.
For all people who suffer living in a property, whether it's a house or an apartment as renters.
Es muy duro quedarse sin hogar.
It is very difficult to find yourself without a home.
Yo y mi familia personalmente ya tuvimos 2 experiencias.
My family and I have experienced this 2 times,
de quedarnos sin vivienda.
Being without a home.
Cuando viví en Normandy y me dieron la noticia de que iba a pagar doble renta.
When I was living in the Normandy apartments in the Cully neighborhood in Northeast Portland, they gave us the notice that we were going to have to pay double our rent.
Fue una pesadilla fuerte para mí.
And it was a horrible nightmare for me.
Me gustaría que en lugar de quitar esta ley de inquilinos,
I would like that instead of removing this law that protects renters,
que al contrario nos brindaran más apoyo para implementar algunas otras leyes más.
that on the contrary, that you would give us even more support and pass even stronger laws,
Y que fueran permanentes.
and that they be permanent laws.
Les agradecería mucho por su apoyo,
I thank you very much for your support.
ya que todas las familias necesitamos esa ley.
All of the families need this ordinance.
Muchas gracias, señores del jurado. Les deseo un bonito día.
Thank you, members of the council, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you all.
Adelfa and I are members of the Cully Housing Action Team in Northeast Portland, a group of neighbors working to create stable housing and resist displacement. And at our monthly meeting last night, we signed this card that we would like to give to you that says, the Cully Housing Action Team says, Portland renters need relo. Please extend the emergency rental relocation ordinance. And
Thank you. Could you put your name in the record as well, please?
What's that?
Put your name in the record.
My name is Mira Conklin.
Thank you. If you could give it to Carla, thank you. The next 3, please.
Are Mike Adera, Michael Hawkins, and Tony Tape, and they'll be followed by Matilda Bickers, Leor Schweitzer, and Daniel Whitaker.
Great, please start.
Okay, my name is Mike Gedera, and I live in Southeast Portland.
I'm sorry, could you turn that mic on? Somebody turned it off. Yeah, just press the gray button. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. My name is Mike Gedera, and I live in Southeast Portland. I also rent one house out, and that makes me a small landlord. I've always, rented it out for below market rate, and the relocation ordinance doesn't inconvenience me, hasn't inconvenienced me. Other people have spoken to the basic day-to-day problems of being a landlord, but I'm not worried about the relocation ordinance. I'm also a father of an adult son who has a severe mental illness, And one of the big contributing factors to his relapse this year has been impossibility of finding independent housing. His condition has actually cost this city and the county a lot of money in this year. So much of that would have been unnecessary if he had been able to find a place to live by himself. It really contributed to his condition. Here's the truth about small landlords, so-called small landlords. We live in the community. We're affected by the housing emergency. Peripherally, we have family members who are undergoing the stress of the housing crisis. We don't have corporate fortunes to buffer us. I've spoken to a lot of landlords who make the same argument. Basically, the way I look at the speculation that's been happening in this town is that it's just like an industry dumping pollution in the river. It's a peripheral expense that they hope other people will pay for. That's why I think this ordinance should be permanent. We should reduce the threshold to 5%, and we should eliminate the single landlord clause. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning.
My name is Emily Schnipper, and I'm reading testimony from Michael Hawkins, who could not be here today. My name is Michael Hawkins, and since 2011, I lived in a triplex in Selwood. I lived in a unit upstairs, and another tenant lived in the basement unit with his 3 sons. The landlord lived in the other upstairs unit and also owned a few other houses elsewhere. This past summer, both me and the other tenant who rented the basement apartment were given a 90-day no-cause eviction notice. We were later told by the landlord that she desired to sell her place or have it torn down in order to build a 6 to 10 unit condominium on her lot. When the other tenant and I asked her about the relocation fee, she initially acted as if she were unaware of the law, then later in the same conversation stated that she had already talked with her real estate attorneys about the law and said she was exempt since we were all roommates. When we pointed out that all 3 units met the legal definition of a dwelling space, separate entrances, kitchens, bedrooms, and bathrooms, she insisted that her lawyers had told her otherwise and told me I was lucky to have lived there as long as I did. So began my long search for another home. By this time, I only had 30 days left since she had given me the notice when I was out of town visiting my kids and family in another state for 6 weeks. At this point, I pursued legal action. However, my attorney told me that although I had a good case, it would be 6 months or longer before we saw any results, even if we won. Meanwhile, I ran out of time and money to move and ended up living in a tent in a friend's backyard for 5 weeks with my son before we found a new place, which was smaller and cost me twice as much in rent. It has now been 60 days and she has still refused to pay either the relo fee or return our $600 deposit, but instead sent me an invoice for $2,800, claiming damages to her floor, windows, missing smoke detectors, all of which was undocumented, fabrications of things we never knew were missing in the first place. All my savings were drained because of this move. Why do I have to take legal action and pay for the upfront cost? I'm given legal options, but the results of any possible justice are slow to take place. Who can wait half a year for the small court system to work? It leaves me mentally, financially, and emotionally exhausted. All the while, she now rents those units on Airbnb for double or triple the profit. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or good morning, sorry.
Good morning. My name is Tony Tape, and I'm a landlord for the last 10 years. I own a 4-unit rental building and a rental home, so I do not qualify as a small landlord. I fully support the extension and expansion of relo. It is my view that these measures do not impose an unreasonable burden to attentive and competent landlords. If a landlord plans and budgets like I do, increases below 5% are sufficient to maintain and improve properties. I view measures such as this ordinance the same way that I view a minimum wage. As a business owner, there are no exceptions for paying minimum wage. If I'm having a bad month, I do not get to lower the wage of employees. At this point, I don't have employees yet. I'm that small. But to me, a lot of this falls under the privatizing profits and socializing losses. That is how a lot of landlords are able to make the money they do. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Matilda Bickers, Leor Schweitzer, and Daniel Whitaker, and they'll be followed by Sarah Chandler, Kelly Francois, and Eli Spivak.
Good morning.
Hi. I'm so nervous.
Don't be nervous.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you because your relocation ordinance, am I too loud? I can't tell.
No, it's good. That's right.
Okay. It saved me. Last Monday, I got a notice from my landlady that she was raising my rent $250 from $1,300 to $1,550. And I sat there in my yard crying and talking to my dad. And then I found out that I'm still covered by the relocation ordinance. So there followed some negotiations between me and my landlady as she lowered my rent increase incrementally until she finally realized that she had to lower it below 10%. And so now it's a $60 increase. But I know that if we don't pass this again in December, I'm looking at another increase. But I'd like to back up for a second. So people keep talking about small landlords like they're trustworthy members of our community and like they're really good people. My landlady qualifies as a small landlord. Probably she owns a couple different places in Portland. She's a slumlord. She's found ways to charge me money that you couldn't imagine as long as you're reasonably ethical. When I first moved in, she kept my trash service off until I paid her an extra $200 to turn it back on. It's $58 every 2 months. There are ways for landlords to make money if they're unethical, that they find loopholes. They don't need to be protected. We need to be protected. So I don't have a fire detector in my unit. There's all this stuff wrong. My water heater broke in August, and I knew as soon as I looked up how much a water heater costs that I would be seeing a rent increase so that she could recoup what she was spending on it. I debated telling her, and on the advice of Margot Black and some other people, I did tell her. My basement flooded for 5 days before she did anything about it. And in part, that's because I pay water. So it didn't cost her anything to leave me with a flooded basement for days and days. You have no idea what it's like for tenants. That's all I have to say. I'm sorry.
Could you just give us your name again, please?
I'm Matilda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm going to really severely amend what I wanted to say because so many people have echoed this. I want to begin just really quickly by saying thanks to all of you guys for the work that you've done to help renters here. When I moved here 2 years ago from San Francisco, yes, San Francisco, I was flabbergasted at the few laws there were here to protect people. I could not believe that there was literally nothing to protect renters here. And I realized we're all playing catch up because the rents went up so dramatically, so quickly. And I'm heartened to see all of these changes made so fast to help so many people that are desperate for help. I specifically want to thank Commissioner Daly for just getting the ball rolling on so much of this stuff so fast after you got into office. Chloe, you're a hero to so many people in this city. Without all of this work that you all are doing, I mean, people's lives are being so badly affected out there. I don't know if you guys realize how bad it is. It's really bad. Okay, so I also want to agree that this one unit loophole really needs to be just axed completely. Basically, there is no way to prove that somebody owns one unit, that they actually do. You just heard testimony today from a lawyer that's his job. I mean, he's got so much at his disposal to check that. He even said it was impossible for him to figure out if somebody had one unit. So that you just can't confirm that. The other thing is that you wanted to put this in place to protect the small landlords because they're supposedly cost burdened. There is also no way to check if they're cost burdened, none whatsoever. It's I'll easily admit there's probably a very small number of landlords who are cost burdened, but I'm going to wager it's a very small percentage given the enormous amount of increased rents landlords are enjoying right now and the massive increase in their property values. So I also want to say really quickly that needs to be taken out completely, and there should not be an exemption to aid people who have just ADUs. Let's face it, you have enough money to build an ADU, you have plenty of money for relocation fees. So I'm going to go on record as saying that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next three, please.
Are Sarah Chandler, Kelly Francois, and Eli Spivak, and they'll be followed by Jay Rumetsky, Edith Gillis, and Mark Kramer.
Eli, do you want to start, please? Eli, would you like to start, please? Thank you.
Okay. My name's Eli Spivak. I'm back wearing my landlord hat and developer small contractor. I support the extension of the housing emergency. I think a lot of times about the opportunity Portland has to learn from mistakes in other cities. One of those opportunities is to increase our renter protections, as the person before spoke. They're non-existent in our city, and to increase our supply of housing. And I think that there probably is a relationship between the two of them. I think that there are some things you can do to increase renter protections that provide some friction to the housing production market. The things covered in this ordinance are not among them. I think that as a landlord, it is totally feasible to pay relocation benefits. I can't imagine going backwards on 30 to 90 day, 90 back to 30 day. People need to have a chance to have a soft landing when redevelopment happens or someone's moved out, and those are key elements of that. I think that the 6-month extension worries me a little bit. I see the political benefit of having a hard deadline to create some policy decisions, but I worry a little bit that might work to actually get us across the finish line to make these refinements instead of letting them drag out. It creates this cliff event where someone who's a tenant or landlord might take some rash preemptive action leading up to the end of the 6-month time period that they might not otherwise take because they're just not sure what the rules, they're afraid of what the rules might come into play. So I would recommend extending that to 12 or 18 months and still hit the 6-month policy time to come up with the new rules. And I also want to echo what Margot Black said about other cities. I mean, Portland is the first city in Oregon to really wrestle with this significantly, and we're in a housing market that's much beyond the city limits. And to the extent that we can come up with a well-crafted set of rules, I sure hope that that gets copied and pasted by other jurisdictions around us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hi, my name is Kelly Francois, and I'm here. I'm a small landlord, the quote small landlord, and I support removing the exemption for small landlords, and I support doing it today. Not going back to committee, but go ahead and doing it. We've heard a lot of stories. I have more stories about tenants not being treated fairly. And as a landlord, if I decide my tenants need to move out for whatever reason, that's my decision. The cost burden should be on me. Thank you for your time and listening. I have a lot written, but it's all been said very eloquently. And also, Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Sarah Chandler. I am the chairperson of Right to Dream 2, and I also work with other organizations like Urban League, the Village Coalition, Join, and YWCA. I am here to speak about the state of emergency and ask for it to be extended for the 18 months. I work with hundreds of houseless people every day. The need is obviously there. It's a work in progress. I just hope that it can be extended and that we can continue to get people in while this is definitely an emergency that needs to be dealt with. I want to thank you guys for your support, for helping Right to Dream 2 move, and all the work that you've done with us, Fritz. I really appreciate it. Also, I was asked by other board members to speak about possibly bringing up again the zoning laws, that if we change some of them, then other shelters or rest areas could also be built to help with this situation. And I think that's all I have to say.
Very well. Thank
Sarah,
you.
I just want to thank you for your participation in the Good Neighbour Agreement for the move to Right to Dream 2. And yes, I agree that we need some zoning code changes, and that would be one of the things that would be a deliverable for no longer needing the emergency clause. So thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot, I wanted to say I strongly support Udaley's amendment to get rid of the single-family exemption, along with Fish's proposal to basically treat an accessory dwelling unit like a group house. So I forgot to put up my notes. Thanks.
Thank you. Next three, please.
are Jay Rumeski, Edith Gillis, and Mark Kramer, and they'll be followed by Eddie Perchetta, Diane Kefauver, and Jane Leo.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Jay Rymeski, I'm a landlord.
I'm sorry, could you turn that mic? The mic got turned off. Thank you.
Jay Rymeski, small landlord here in Portland, Oregon. Challenged somewhat by the ordinance and some of the language in it, mostly because I've looked at what's happening in Seattle and San Francisco, and the way that their ordinances are written, at least for small landlords like me, it leaves the opportunity for me to move back into my house without having to pay a fine. It's how I look at it. I'm completely behind the relocation fee for circumstances that fit it, but I don't think I should have to pay when I want to basically relocate back into my own property. They don't have that in Seattle, much more difficult there in terms of a rental market. They don't have it in San Francisco. They make us look like, the Bush League in terms of the rental market. And I think it should be considered when you consider rewriting the ordinance. The other thing is the sale of a property. State of Oregon statutes basically states that can generate a no-cause eviction. It's my property. I don't understand why I don't have the opportunity as a property owner to hold on to it or dispose of it. And the reality is I have disposed of it. So I guess I'm in the process of no longer being a landlord, and I've taken rental units out of the market because of it. So it exacerbates the problem you're trying to solve. So you really got to be careful with the ordinance in terms of the language and who gets to be impacted by it, because we're impacted by it too.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Edith Gillis, and just to address the last testimony, I know of several folks the landlords have said they had to move back into their house, claimed emergency, whatever else, and then within a few weeks or a month were headed for rent again at higher. And that bouncing back and forth can go on for several different reasons, and I want to alert you to the problems of that. At the minimum, I want this continued, this ordinance extended for 18 months, but I really think it should be permanent. The one exemption that I do want is not what either of you have spoken about, but that the only exemption would be when the tenants live in the same house as the owner, occupant, who is occupying it for a minimum and sleeping there at a minimum of 11 months of the year, for causes of safety concerns and criminality. Only under those conditions would there be someone not having to pay the relocation. And then that, of course, could still be negotiated or still up for litigation over criminality issues. Now, I also want us to, is this working?
Yes.
I want us to also make sure that we have no demolition of safe, affordable housing. We need to have sustainable housing stock and not replace with these trashy, big monstrosities that have mold and wood rot, but that instead maintain a percentage of units for the percentages of people at the rates of their income. So if we have 50% of the income, 50% of the people living in the area having no more than $700 a month from SSI, then there should be 50% of the units that are built should be for no more than $250 a month rent. And it can be more than the kind of housing that we have. We need to have a city public bank, and we need to expand our monies for housing attorneys and support.
Thank you, both of you, for your testimony.
Well, I just wanted to add, when I did call the city to talk about my situation, the help that I got from one of the city employees basically stated that I had the rights that I just described, but they failed to realize they were talking about Seattle and San Francisco. So they mistakenly misinterpreted the ordinance based on their own research.
Thank you.
Next three are Eddie Perchetta, Diane Kefauver, and Jane Leo. And then the last three I showed sign up are Katrina Holland, Carrie Lyons, and Soren Impey.
Good afternoon. Would you like to start?
Certainly. My name is Diane Kefauver. For the past 13 months, I've rented property from Peak Property Management at 8435 Southeast Inslee Road in Southeast Portland. On May 31st, I was given a $75 increase. With my portion of the rent, because I get money from Home Forward, my portion of the rent was raised 30%. I'm retired. I was the domestic violence attorney for the state of Montana. Most of my work was pro bono. So I don't have any money, no income at all, but my Social Security, which I've earned working since I was 15 years old. So I receive $756 every month from Social Security. This rent increase, like I say, it would be 30% of my income. I subtract that $298. It leaves me with $456 to live on for food, car insurance, gas, food, medicine, and I just had to get new dentures. Where's that money coming from? Try living on $456 a month. It's real impossible. But they wanted to raise me again, and it says $75 a month that I don't have. So I gave them a 30-day notice and started looking for another place. That was on July 31st. On August 2nd, I gave them a notice that they were in violation of this ordinance, and they would have to pay me relocation assistance. They said no. She said, we don't do that, is what the property manager said. We don't do that. 4 days later, they gave me a notice to vacate, saying I hadn't paid the rent. I did pay the rent. I paid it on the 31st. They were just doing a dirty trick on me. They were harassing me because I filed the notice to for relo assistance. When I pointed out to them that there are 72 hours for non-payment of rent, that notice, they were charging me the rent that was not due until July or October this month. I couldn't find anyone to talk to. I was going through hell thinking they were going to throw me out my apartment at any moment, or if I left the apartment, if I teach English as a second language classes at the Vaz Worker Center. If I left my apartment, I would come home and be locked out, or all my belongings would be thrown in the street. So this was a very stressful period to me.
Thank you.
One other thing, I finally talked to the manager 3 days later, and she said, oh, that was a computer error. So this is the atrocities that a landlord can do to us that leaves us completely defenseless. I've had to cash out all retirement savings I had in order to move to this new place I'm at now. And that leaves me nothing to fall back on if I get sick.
Thank you for your testimony. Jane, did you want to go next?
I'm Jane Leo. I'm the Governmental Affairs Director for the Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors. And my testimony, I honestly was not going to testify, but after hearing some of the comments and the questions, I felt compelled. I do have with me, in response to statements that have been made that landlords are not hurt by this, or that this isn't detrimental to the single-family rental market, I have more than a dozen individuals who own single-family rental property who have written in as to why they are putting their housing on the market. And they have not, and they have asked me personally in most cases not to disclose their name for fear of retribution, and out of fear that some of the tenant sites are actually advocating violence against the landlord. So there's a fear of personal protection. To a question that was asked, I want to point out that not all accessory dwelling units are physically connected to the house nor in the house. There are plenty of neighborhoods where the ADU is over the garage and the garage is a detached garage. So I call that to your attention. Also, this city for years has put into place efforts to try to create more accessory dwelling units to increase our rental supply or alternative housing. To now say that property owner, homeowner who has a tenant in over the garage is no longer exempt is burdensome, and it will be difficult to continue to promote the building of ADUs in this city. So you do have an adverse reaction on that. To that point, the city has got to address its housing supply, both from the market rate housing as well as that which is subsidized. The city has to address that in order to deal with issues such as what we've been dealing with for quite some time. When the city sets its limits on what the rent increase can be, the city needs to take a look at itself. How much did the water and sewer rates go up? How much did the property taxes because of bonds go up? I've done some quick math just looking at my own situation, and my property taxes went up close to 16% because between Multnomah County, the city of Portland, and then if you add on to that what happened with the sewer water rates, you see increases that are not to a property owner, that are not related to whether or not that property is in rental. So whatever your cap is, the city has got to take a look at itself. I do want to point out that I've been tracking how many single-family housing units have been put on the market for sale since the city adopted the mandatory relocation fee on February 2nd. As of September 30th, there are more than 440 single-family properties that we know were or are tenant-occupied for sale on the market. So they are leaving the market because of the uncertainty and the burdens that the City of Portland's ordinances have put on single-family owners of single-family rental. To the point that continues to be made behind me, nobody bailed out these property owners in 2008 when the market tanked.
Thank you. Excuse me. Please, everybody, just let's listen. And yet you can agree or disagree. Yes, seriously. Are you completed?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for entertaining me. I wrote this to come in right at 3 minutes, so we'll see. Ed Pichetta, 715 Northeast 20th Avenue, Apartment 4, Portland 97232. Members of the council, while some say only rent control can effectively remedy Portland's ongoing housing crisis, in the absence of such control, Portland's tenant relocation assistance provisions are the only effective alternative for now. I can speak with some authority on the effectiveness of these provisions. With relocation assistance looming for the council back in mid-January, that month, I and my fellow month-to-month tenants in our garden complex received a letter that I've provided copies to your office from our recently anointed property management company. This letter demanded that we commit to signing an as-yet unseen and unavailable fixed-term lease. The letter also said that if we not sign and return such a commitment in less than 10 days, we were to consider the letter at hand to be our 90-day tenancy termination notices. Some of these tenants, like myself, had lived in our units for more than a dozen years. Having recently returned to Portland, I was not yet employed, and either a large rent increase or a termination of my tenancy would have been life-altering under existing law, and I would not now be able to live and work in Portland and contribute to the community. Was it a coincidence that being on the kind of lease we were ultimately offered in February was a fixed-term lease that landlords thought would allow them to escape the relocation assistance provisions of Portland's housing emergency ordinance? I think not. I offer as evidence the fact that after receiving my landlord's lease offer and telling them shortly thereafter that I couldn't afford to pay the proposed greater than 10% increased rent provisions in it and would therefore have to move, they verbally withdrew the supposed 90-day notice and shortly thereafter the fixed-term lease offer. I can only believe that my property owner's unwillingness to be obligated to pay relocation assistance, together with my awareness of Oregon landlord-tenant law and Margot Black's very effective work with the Portland Tenants Union, were key to their withdrawals. While I remain in the same apartment I was in February, with tenant relocation assistance provisions poised to expire periodically, my housing situation remains precariously unstable. My ability to ever buy a home in Portland remains uncertain due to, at my age, my concern over my ability to obtain a sufficiently remunerative career. I think my situation, tenancy, is probably the new reality for many inner-city Portlanders. While I'm not saying property owners shouldn't be able to sell or convert their properties as a whole as they see fit when the time comes, they should be flush with cash if such time comes, which means they can afford to pay tenant relocation assistance out of their property value windfall. The Portland community in general will benefit greatly over the long term from stable housing for its tenant-focused neighborhoods. With stable, affordable housing, tenant families can spend less time desperately worrying about housing costs, finances, and having to move, and more time planning how to get into a higher-paying career and otherwise enhancing the community. The most effective tool available now to eventually achieve this is to make the tenant relocation assistance provisions permanent, mild though they be. While tenant relocation assistance will not permanently ensconce tenants in neighborhoods, it does ensure that if the time comes when a property owner decides to convert his property to a higher yielding use, the affected tenants will have a better shot at avoiding homelessness. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does that complete our testimony?
The last three people
Oh, sorry.
are
Very
Katrina
good.
Holland, Carrie Lyons, and Soren Impey.
Very good. Come on up.
It's just me.
It's a solo act, perhaps. Very good, Katrina.
I
You get the
guess
last
so.
word.
Yeah, such a privilege. Thanks so much for having us here today. I definitely commend Commissioner Udaley and Commissioner Fish for bringing forth this this amendment to the relocation ordinance. Community Alliance of Tenants is of the opinion that it definitely should lift the exemption for smaller landlords. As Christina Dirks was saying earlier, it is in fact very true that most of our vulnerable tenants do tend to rent from smaller landlords who own one property as a result of not being able to access mainstream properties due to potentially troubled records, criminal history, potentially evictions history, et cetera. And so there is an equity issue to be concerned about, and I do think that it is something that needs to be passed right away, as opposed to throwing it to the tag, because that commission, although while we have made pretty significant progress, it is a very dysfunctional space, and I don't believe that the group would be able to come to consensus in a manner that is effective to bring forward an amendment to City Council. So we would like to see that passed today. We definitely support lowering the threshold from 10% to 5%. And I think one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of this Portland relocation that hasn't been stated here today is we need to include some provision for landlords to inform their tenants at the time of notice that they are eligible for relocation assistance and how much they are eligible for relocation assistance, because it has been brought to our attention that many tenants have received no-cause evictions or have received rent increases above the threshold, and the landlord is banking on the fact that they do not know. As of yesterday, I literally heard of 5 tenants who received no-cause evictions and were told no, basically, or weren't aware that they were eligible for relocation assistance. And Portland Tenants United and Community Alliance of Tenants, of course, has limited capacity. We cannot serve the entire city. So I think that should be added.
Very good. Thank you all. Good work. For your testimony. Thanks, everybody. And thank you all for being respectful.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So,
Commissioner Fish.
I propose we go ahead with a vote on 1087, and then I have a couple of questions on 1088 before the vote.
Any further discussion on 1087? And this is to extending the housing emergency. Please call the roll.
Udaly?
Just want to thank everyone again who took time out of their days to come give testimony today. Thank my colleagues for supporting this extension. We're clearly still in a housing emergency with no end in sight. Aye.
Fritz?
Well, thanks to former Mayor Hales and to Commissioner Saltzman for first bringing this in October of 15, and then to Commissioner Fish and then myself for extending it in 2016. I'm very interested in fixing the rules. In fact, Michael Bonac said at the very beginning of this, we need fewer dumb rules. And Commissioner Saltzman also corrected the dumb rule about temporary activities being allowed. Permanent improvements like putting water service in can be done in a temporary activity site, which was one of the reasons that we haven't been able to provide more shelter to people. So I believe we need to look for other things like that. The main things we use the housing emergency for are emergency shelters during the winter. We're also using it for Right to Dream 2's current home. And so we need to look at how do we make the zoning code allow these things by right in certain instances. So I'm looking forward to working with the mayor on finding exactly what those dumb rules are and how to fix them. Aye.
Fish?
As Commissioner Fritz pointed out, will be the third time that she and I have cast, and Dan have cast a vote on the state of emergency. It has, as Mark Jolin and others testified a few hours ago, it has paved the way for a lot of innovative and important policy. Yes, ma'am?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It was just today, I thought I heard that...
I'm sorry, but you have to come to the microphone if that's going to be allowed. But
I was afraid to leave today because I thought I heard that if my rent gets raised, I only have 15 days to protest it. And if I don't know that rule, I'm SOL. And that was horrifying. Is that really a rule when you don't even, if you don't know there's a deadline?
It's now 45 days, but this isn't really the time and place to go over that.
Sorry.
Mayor,
Yeah,
we have
we're
the Deputy Director
taking a
of the
vote.
Housing Bureau here. Perhaps he could speak with...
I think Commissioner Udaly got that correct, so unless there's anything else the Housing Bureau Director would like to say, continue, Commissioner Fish.
So, Mayor, this is the third time I've had a chance with two of my colleagues to vote on a housing emergency. And I want to reflect on the fact that, as Mark Jolin and others pointed out, it has paved the way for a lot of good work. And it has focused us on our number one challenge as a community. But we have a lot more work to do. So, Mayor, I thank you for proposing an 18-month extension. And I think over the next 18 months, we will continue to make this our number one priority. I hope at some point we don't have to extend the housing state of emergency. I hope we have laws and rules in place that protect people, and we have figured out a way to significantly boost the production of affordable housing. But for now, I think this is the right thing to do, and I'm proud to support this extension. Aye.
Saltzman?
Well, thank you, Mayor, for proposing this 18-month extension. It's still as necessary as it was when we first adopted it in 2015. And I also wanted to recognize Mayor Hales for his work in bringing this housing emergency into place. I think it has definitely helped pave the way in terms of eliminating some rules, dumb rules, I guess we call them, that may have stood in the way of more shelters being added to our system. And also, I think it has all stimulated this whole council, as well as the county commission and others, to look at ways we can boost production of affordable housing. And those goals remain as important as ever, and I'm pleased to vote for its extension. Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you, everyone. Next item, we'll take the vote on 1088. That's the mandatory relocation assistance. Commissioner Fish, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mayor. So I just want to clarify a couple of things, because we've been here nonstop since 9:30. It is your intent to bring an ordinance to council no later than December 6th?
Correct.
We've had some testimony about the technical advisory group that you have proposed would weigh in on this. And there's a concern that I and others have about their ability to reach consensus. Are we clear, Mayor, that we are seeking majority and minority reports? In other words, we're seeking guidance from the committee, and if they can't reach consensus, we're looking for a range of views that come to us to help inform our work?
That's correct. Several people mentioned that they didn't see that a consensus was possible. That may in fact be the case, but as I stated up front, I'm not prepared to vote on amendments on the fly. I'd like to hear different perspectives, different ideas, get people's perspectives on additional ideas, and somebody proffered what I thought was an intriguing additional idea. I'm interested in what Commissioner Udaley's amendment raises. I'm interested in your friendly amendment to that. And so from my own perspective, I'd like to respect the process we currently have in place, which has the permanent ordinance coming back before the council in December.
And Mayor, just to be clear, because again, we've heard from a lot of people about whether consensus is possible. As a decision maker, what I value is feedback. And it could be a diversity of opinions. It could be contradictory, but if there's no consensus on the issue, I would still like to have the recommendation and advice of the people we've charged with doing that. And finally, in the course of this hearing and prior to this hearing, a bunch of issues have been raised, which I hope the committee will take up. Of course, through the amendments that have at least been preliminarily proposed, there's the question of a small landlord exemption and how to reconcile what Commissioner Udaley has proposed and what I've proposed around ADUs. And as a very competent lawyer previously told us, there's different sections of the code and different language that needs to be reconciled. So I think that needs a clear recommendation. There has been, I think, a very productive conversation about how do we make sure that tenants get notice of their rights and what is the effective way of doing that. I would welcome recommendations to that regard. Margot Black and others alluded in passing to some mechanism for a hardship exemption, recognizing that there are circumstances where, unique circumstances where someone should have recourse. I'm just, again, I think setting up that process and having clear boundaries is important. We've had a number of people talk about the utility costs. I know this is no solace, but your water bill would be more expensive in most suburban cities as your water bill. But the question of what can and cannot be passed on to tenants and how that is done, clearly, as the person in charge of the utilities, I'm going to go back to the city attorney's office and get some more advice on that, because I'd like to know. But I think this question needs further ventilation. So there are, I think, a bunch of very important questions that have been raised. I look forward to getting recommendations and to evaluating them. I've been clear about where I intend to land in December, but based on you, Mayor, your desire to give the committee a chance to weigh on this, I'm prepared to delay 8 weeks before we make the final decision, because we are, after all, extending the protections, and they remain in place through that period. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Mayor.
Commissioner Udaley.
I have several items I want to hit on. First of all, Director Jolin's testimony and that of others has highlighted the continued urgency of this housing crisis. And despite a massive increase in investment in housing and homeless services, despite preserving and providing more housing and shelter than ever, our homeless population continues to grow in no small part due to our failure to stem the inflow of cost-burdened and displaced renters into our homeless population. The city is addressing on the issue on the supply side. It's not enough, and it is my extremely clear and strong belief that we have left too many renting households vulnerable to cost burdening and displacement by the one-unit exemption. So while I sense there's not a lot of love for passing this amendment, at this time, I'm leaving it on the table. I want to address a few other issues that advocates brought up today. First of all, the 5% threshold. I would love to be able to reduce the threshold to 5%. It's what I wanted initially. 10% was a compromise after a lot of discussion with my colleagues and with the city attorney's office. We have prevailed twice now in court, and the ordinance, we're now in an appeal process. There is a serious and I think well-founded concern that if we significantly change that threshold, we open up the ordinance to a new legal challenge, and there's no guarantee that we would prevail in that new legal challenge. So it's my opinion right now that that's too much of a risk. However, I'm going to be continuing fighting for a overturn of the ban on rent control and the preemption on just cause eviction at the state level. And once we get those regulatory tools back, will it be obviously in a position where we can change that threshold. I absolutely support making this ordinance permanent, and I think it's fairly clear that that will happen. It's not going to happen today. It's not that is not going to make a meaningful difference. The ordinance is in place. The utility fix is of great concern. I've heard from many renters who previously did not have to pay water or garbage that they are now being required to do so. I consider that an increase in their rent that should be included in the 10%. If their utilities are being raised beyond the actual increase, that's a landlord raising the rent. So we'll be addressing that. I want to let you guys know that I also received a 9.7% rent increase this year. My rent has gone up 75% in the last 6 years now. I live in a shabby, small rental home that has had no improvements other than repairs to essential services for a decade, and that was substandard when and unsafe when I moved in. So I continue, although I am in a better position now, to be one of the many faces of our rental crisis. I'm very interested in a vacancy tax. I'm concerned with how we actually prove units are vacant. That's something to dive into. I would support providing a hardship exemption for landlords. We really need that Office of Renter Services in place in order to handle, I guess, appeals for exemption. I'd also like tenants to be able to appeal to that same body to fight rent increases on units that are substandard. No landlord should be able to raise rents on tenants who are living in substandard housing. I'm close to the end, Mayor. I agree with Katrina Holland from CAT that we really need to develop a regional strategy for housing and for tenant protections, and those conversations have begun, and we just can't relent with the pressure on elected representatives at every level, city, county, metro, state. And finally, I can't let the unfortunate comments of one of the last people to give testimony go without saying how disappointing and irresponsible it is to characterize our housing advocates as threatening violence. And I'm going to take a couple more minutes to tell a little story. So last year, I had the unique experience of interviewing a number of tenants who had been profoundly impacted by our rental crisis with the cartoon journalist Joe Sacco. And we talked to a mutual friend of ours who had been repeatedly involuntarily displaced from her housing while dealing with disabling medical conditions and a diminished ability to work and afford housing. And she was embarrassed to tell her story to us. because Joe travels the world, typically to war-torn countries, to interview victims and refugees. And she told us that, and afterwards, Joe said to me that, you know, being a homeowner for several years, he had no idea how bad things had gotten in our rental market, and that he considered what was being done to renters a form of violence. So I just want to put that out there.
Very good. Please call the roll on Udaly amendment to item 10088.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
No.
Fish?
I hope to be able to support this amendment or some hybrid that involves accessory dwelling units, and I think there are some legal issues that need to be, there's some language that needs to be reconciled, and I appreciate the spirit of it because I have been persuaded to reconsider this single unit exemption. But the mayor has asked us to have all of these matters return on December 6th in order to go through an orderly process. I think that's a fair request. No.
Saltzman?
No.
Wheeler?
No, for the reasons I mentioned previously, the amendment fails. 4-1. To the main motion, any further discussion?
Commissioner Fish's amendment?
No, I withdraw it.
Okay.
He's withdrawn it.
Thank you.
And the second?
To the main motion. Please call the roll.
Udaly?
It's important that we continue to understand the devastating nature of our housing crisis and the impacts an unregulated market is having on households in every corner of our city. I remain deeply committed to this issue, and my office staff dedicate much of their time researching and developing policies that will mitigate displacement, making housing more accessible and stable, and increasing our supply of truly affordable units. I'm hopeful about the future of renters here because I'm confident that although we could not come to an agreement today, each of my fellow commissioners understands the nature of this emergency and are also dedicated to helping us solve the problems. I want to remind everyone that this is only a continuation of policies we already have in place. We have more coming that requires each of you to continue to share your stories with us so that we remain focused on what really matters, keeping Portland housed. Please pay close attention to council agenda items over the next couple of months because we are all working to make changes that will further stabilize our rental market and improve the lives of thousands of Portland renters. Thank you very much to the mayor's staff, the joint office, the Portland Housing Bureau, and my staff, especially Jamie Duhamel, for all your work and dedication to the most vulnerable in our city. I vote aye.
Fritz?
Well, thank you to everybody who is here today and everybody who was here before they had to go. I hope when we do consider the permanent rules that we'll have an evening meeting so that it'll be more easy for some people to come. Although it's in the middle of December, or it's in December, it's kind of dark, and that means that seniors may not be able to come as well. So there's factors to consider. Thank you to those of you who were here today and also those who sent in testimony. Thank you, Commissioner Udaly, for your leadership on this and your continued determination to right the wrongs in the renter-landlord relationships around the city. And thank you, Mayor Hale. Mayor Wheeler, I haven't done that for a really long time.
Doesn't matter who. It's all the same.
It's not Mayor. It's not
He calls
Mayor
me
Wheeler.
Commissioner Fritz. I mean, it's
I
just
know,
turnabout
but
is fair
there
play.
is that. And it's not the same, Mayor Wheeler, because you have the Housing Bureau and you are have done so much, as was recognised in the first ordinance. You've done so much to improve the lot of people who are living outside, to provide housing, to provide shelter, to provide assistance. It was your staff who finally were able to find the site that Right to Dream 2 were able to move to, and your site that helped your staff who helped them to get their water and other services to that property. So thank you for that. And I know that you, like me, continue to be dedicated to make sure that they have a permanent home for the foreseeable future. I mean, that's the sad part about this, is that it's going to be necessary for the foreseeable future. So I appreciate the extra time, though, to make sure that we are addressing things in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner. I agree that we need to create an exemption process based on need. I am very concerned about unintended consequences. I was a landlady for a while my parents-in-law finished up their service in the Salvation Army. And if they had been only away planning to move into our first home for a year, I would have had to have included the $4,500 in the rent for that year, and that would have increased the rent by $375 a month. That is definitely not what we are intending to do. We are intending to provide affordable housing to a lot of people. So that's something to consider. I am concerned with the number of emails and letters that I've received about people completely leaving the rental business because they feel that we're becoming over-regulated and just too complex. I'm also concerned about people who will, instead of doing the oversight themselves in a friendly and personal relationship, will hire management companies, which then tax on another 10% to the rent. And again, that's not what we want to do. So it certainly does need to be thought for. I do agree. It sounds like there's only 2 tenants on the Technical Advisory Committee. I would suggest that make sure that it's more balanced as we do this last push. And I also agree with Commissioner Fish that minority reports are compelling as well as majority, and we don't expect nor get consensus from many of our advisory bodies. I think we certainly need to add in the fees as part of a rent increase, and I'm hoping that this extra time will allow us to do that. I certainly know that we need more clarity in the code, in that Commissioner Udaley and I have a different reading of what it says now. So appreciate Alan Kessler, who brought out so many different places in the current code where we need some clarification. Overall, we desperately need the new office for education and adjudication of these things, the office, whatever it's being called, of landlord-tenant affairs, or we need somebody within the city, which currently we really don't have, to be able to explain to people what the rules are. And we need to have a process so that people don't have to go to court to get explanations of those rules. And I hope that happens very quickly. And then finally, on the regional strategy that is finally starting to happen at Metro. I was involved in them in my first term, which was 9 years ago now. I served on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and there was no discussion at that time about affordable housing. Now it's front and centre, and it's not only front and centre for Portland and Gresham, it's front and centre for Hillsborough and other Washington County and other jurisdictions in Washington and Clackamas County, as well as Multnomah County. So that is progress. Commissioner Udaley and I serve as the delegates to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and I'm hoping that they will really take up this issue of, oh, by the way, why is Portland the only place to have a construction excise tax, thanks to Commissioner Saltzman, which then is used for affordable housing? Why don't the other jurisdictions do that? And what other kind of revenue are we going to maybe think of that could pay for this affordable housing assistance, which is so desperately needed by people who've been living here for years? Aye.
Fish.
I want to thank Commissioner Udaley for being the architect of this important piece of legislation. And in all of our work on the council, at some point people will look back on a signature issues that someone has worked on. For Dan, of course, it's been the children's levy, among many other things. I think this will be among, if not the most important accomplishments of your service. But more than that, you've been our leader on this whole cluster of issues, and I thank you for your work and your partnership. Mayor, this is the second of a suite of 4 issues that you have championed and brought and are bringing to council with broad support that I think are going to make a huge difference, and I thank you for your leadership and the work that you and your staff are doing. I agree with those who believe this should be made permanent, and that is my intent in December to so vote. I also think that it is not sufficiently broad currently in scope, and there's a compelling argument that this should not only be citywide but countywide, and as with all of our housing issues, we must bring the full region into these discussions. It is just out of balance, and we have to have some very candid conversations. I want to thank Amira Streeter and Jamie Dunphy on my team. I want to thank the senior staff people of each of my colleagues who are a pleasure to work with. I want to thank everyone who took time out today to come and inform us and share their views. This is democracy in action, and I think this is an important action, but I think in December we will strengthen this action. Aye.
Saltzman?
Well, I appreciate all the testimony we had this morning and this afternoon as well. And just also wanted to give a special shout out to Commissioner Daly for her leadership on this issue in accomplishing so much in relatively lightning speed as a freshman commissioner in your first 2 months on the job, getting this relocation ordinance passed. So.
It is technically my first month on the job.
Was it
but
first month? Okay, I
That's
wasn't-
no consolation 9 months later that I haven't.
My memory gets hazy, so
Yeah.
I thought I'd fudge it and say 2 months. Okay. In your first month on the job, congratulations.
Thank
Pleased to support this and look forward to supporting it in December as well. Aye.
Wheeler?
I obviously strongly support this ordinance. I agree with Commissioner Fish that the ordinance should be permanent, and that's why it's coming back in December. As I said earlier, I'm very interested in the amendments that were put forth today, but I can't support them without understanding exactly what it is we're proposing to do. This is not an idea, this is not an idea, this is passing a law. And I think it's okay to wait 8 weeks to better understand what we're talking about and what the options are. We even had disagreement up here and up here about, Margot, I let you talk for 5 minutes, I get 2 minutes. All right, is that okay? Is that fair? For a millionaire, great. Okay, I have a voice, thank you. Any rate, I support the ordinance. I think it's important that we continue to push on this. I don't believe we have the full vision on the table yet. The RELA ordinance that we passed, as Commissioner Daly just mentioned, was done in response to an emergency situation in our community and considerable testimony from people in this community who are truly struggling. And it deserves an all-hands-on-deck approach, not just by the City of Portland. I agree with those who said we need a regional solution to this issue. And I appreciated the state representative who 2 hours ago testified that the legislature still has work that it needs to do in order to address this emergency. And I'm committed to doing those things that we can do here in the City of Portland to address those issues. So I vote aye on the ordinance. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Andrea. I want to thank Cupid. I want to thank Michelle for your tireless work on this. But there's a lot more work to do. This isn't the end. We've only scratched the surface. So thank you all for being here. Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Next item, please.
Good job. What time is the lunch break here?
Why don't we do this one next? We've had people waiting for 2 hours for it.
3, actually.
3, thank you.
Item, the time certain, 10:45.
Let's do 1089, and we're going to have to move the rest to this afternoon.
Okay, 1089, adopt City of Portland, Oregon Equal Employment Opportunity Affirmative Action Plan for Minorities and Women, January 1, 2018 to December 31, 2022.
The city is required to have an affirmative action plan as a federal contractor and has had a plan in place for women and minorities for over 35 years. The plan also includes veterans and individuals with disabilities as added populations for reporting. Colleagues, what we have before you is a 5-year plan from 2018 through 22. The Bureau of Human Resources provides at least yearly reports to council on the city's progress. The plan is a management tool to assess and ensure workforce diversity and equal employment opportunities for all. This tool, coupled with the Bureau's racial equity roadmaps, are important to the city's goals of inclusiveness. Turning the discussion, the specifics to Anna and Donnie. Thank you for both being here.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. Anna Canowit, Director of the Bureau of Human Resources. With me is Donnie.
Hard to hear you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Folks, could we bring the conversation down a little bit?
With me is Donnie Adair, who has had a long history with the city of Portland, including most recently as one of our human resources business partners. But Donnie has been involved with civil rights issues since 1974 and has a lot of expertise in helping to develop the affirmative action plan. So I personally really appreciate his assistance in doing this on behalf of the city. Before I turn it over to Donnie, I did want to make one note that unlike the other categories, including people of color, women, and veterans, for individuals with disabilities, the city is way behind of the established goal, federal goal of 7%. We reached that in only 9 job categories out of 108. So again, I want to thank you for authorizing a position within the Bureau of Human Resources that will spearhead the strategic plan that you adopted for increasing employment of individuals with disabilities and creating mechanisms for making the environment much more welcome and safe. One of the things you'll also see in the plan is some areas, I mean, many areas. We're certainly not saying we're perfect. There's lots of work to be done. But I think in terms of sworn police, adopting the contract that increased wages and some other things, along with some very intentional world-class recruitment that the Police Bureau is doing, is also showing results in terms of more diversity and hiring of women. Last, as Mayor Wheeler noted, this is but one tool. It's an important one. There are many others. The Bureau's racial equity plans are just another tool for us to use. But it is key, I think, in these efforts that the Bureau of Human Resources is closely aligned with the Office of Equity and Human Rights, because between our 2 offices, we can do a lot of work, both in terms of outreach, but also in terms of city efforts to be sure that this is a welcome and inclusive environment, that we truly are an employer of choice. Surprisingly, that model is not very common. I was told by the City of Tacoma, King County, City of Seattle, they don't have that same synergy between the 2 bureaus, and I think it is immensely important in moving this forward. So very pleased with that, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donnie Adair. Thank you, Donnie.
Good morning. I'm Donnie Adair, owner of Donnie Adair Consulting, 8958 North Wall in Portland, and former city employee, as Anna mentioned, state employee, and I spent a decade with Emmanuel Hospital as well. It's been a pleasure to assist the city to put together really a revision of the current plan for 2013 to 2017, which has recently been extended to the end of the calendar year, just so we could do a thorough job of reviewing, revising, and coming up with this plan, which will go to 2022, so about 4.5 years, or we're calling it a 5-year plan. But the thing that makes this plan unique is that affirmative action should not be in the affirmative action office. It needs to be out in the bureau. So we started back in 2007 getting bureaus involved in developing their own strategies and actions to eliminate any underutilization that we have. And that has worked for the city. They've made steady improvements in the number of minorities, the number of women in non-traditional jobs, and most recently, veterans. And with this new initiative on individuals with disabilities, I look for improvement there as well. Let me thank the council for their reaffirmation policy statements that all of you submitted. We appreciate your commitment, and without starting things at the decision-making level at the very top, nothing ever really gets done, nothing is ever successful. We work with all 23 offices and bureaus. Each one of the executives or directors in those bureaus have also issued affirmative statements supporting equal opportunity and affirmative action, and each bureau has looked very carefully at the data provided by Human Resources and acknowledged where they do have underutilization and put in place an effective plan that will rise to this challenge. So if you look at it overall, there are only about 8 of the 108 job groups that we have in this plan where we're underutilized for minorities and only 7 for women. When you look at it from a bureau standpoint, many bureaus or several of the bureaus have challenges remaining, which you would not think are unique. They're probably challenges that exist throughout our society. For instance, women in technology, getting more women involved, recruiting, retaining, promoting women in technology. And has talked about the issue with sworn officers and what the police bureau is doing. And also the fire bureau, which I came out of that organization originally, very proud of what they've continued to do, especially in an organization where everybody has to be promoted up from the bottom. It's very hard to get people, particularly women, in the mid-management, upper management level. We've seen some success, and we lost the woman police or fire chief, but that will happen again because of the efforts of the Fire Bureau in plans like this. When we look at some of the other bureaus, such as Transportation and Parks, Parks is a bureau that has parity with 26 of the 32 job groups that they have, which is admirable, but yet they still have some challenges, primarily in maintenance and trades for women and minorities, particularly Hispanics and botanic-type jobs. There's been an increase in the availability there. So transportation also has similar challenges with maintenance, trades, and so forth, but they are actively working with groups like Women in Trades, working with different ethnic groups in the community to make our recruiting successful. So the good news is that overall Portland continues to make progress, but we also have to recognize the challenges. And I just want to echo 2 things. Individuals with disabilities, Portland has kind of given lip service to that, and it is great now that you have some staffing to spearhead that. We really got to do better in recruiting and retaining and promoting individuals with disabilities. The other area that I noted was with your directors and executives. You recently lost some over the last couple of years, and you were down to where the only executive of color was the equity director. And we really appreciate the mayor's leadership in looking and doing open and competitive for the city's largest agency, showing and demonstrating that there are competent, qualified men and women, people of color, for all positions in the city. There's no place, no position that we couldn't competently recruit qualified people in a diverse pool. So, you know, having adopted the Charles Jordan standard and in having that demonstrated, that leadership by the mayor, means a lot. It means a lot. It's going to say to your department heads, when I get an executive position, I need to do open and competitive, and I need to do just as good a job of recruiting, whether it's regional, whether it's national, to fill those positions, because that's very, very important. So those are the highlights that I have. I would entertain any questions that you have about the report that you have. I have read all 751 pages of it.
Well,
It is thick.
Mayor, I know we're all itching to go to lunch. So first of all, I know, Donnie, you've read this carefully, and so on page 463, are you stand by everything on that page?
Everything on that page.
This is the document that Mr. Dare is referring to, and it's it's the size of the Manhattan phone book, and it contains a gold mine of information and recommendations. Two things. One, Anna, thank you for the work you've done with the utilities on the pilot to try to expand opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. Mr. Adair noted that we're lagging in how we address people with disabilities, and I think that's a particular area where we have a lot of room to grow and learn. We're learning from our friends to the north in Seattle, and I think it's very important that we try this pilot out, figure out how we can be a more welcoming employer, and then build on it. And second, to Donnie, and based on a prior council presentation we had, one takeaway for me is that we have to rethink our whole recruitment strategies. You know, once upon a time, I'm being a little flip here, but once upon a time, I think the city felt like you put an ad in a scanner, you've covered, you know, check a box. And I think now we know that we're looking nationally for the best talent, but we're competing against other public and private employers that want that talent too. And we can't expect they're just going to knock on our door. We got to identify people. We got to reach out to them. We have to recruit them. A couple of our most successful recent citywide national searches, I think, bear that out. But that requires a different approach to how we do hiring. And the net effect is we're going to get better talent. But we can't just post things and use listservs. We got to go out and actively recruit, or as someone said at that day a while ago, poach, you know, talent. And so all of us need guidance, you know, in how we do that more effectively, with the goal of having a more diverse workforce and a better led city. So thank you for your work.
Yeah. I do want to thank the affirmative action representatives from the bureaus and offices. Each bureau and office has someone, including your offices, and some of you more than one, who have taken on the responsibility for this program in their area, and we really appreciate that. And some of the affirmative action committees and parks and other bureaus that get involved in this. So it isn't just a few people. Most of these bureaus did vet this before their entire management group before submitting that to us. So everybody's aware of what's in the affirmative action plan. We only print the required few numbers of this that you guys require. This is posted on the Bureau of Human Resources website so that anybody in the world can look at all of this information. It's not a secret, it's public information. So those who would want to look at it, it'll be a couple of weeks before the new one is posted, but the current one is currently posted.
Very good.
Any other questions?
Colleagues, any further questions? Any public testimony on this item?
We have one person signed up, Shedrick Wilkins.
One person, come on up. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for reading all of the report.
I'm Shedrick Wilkins, and I commend Mayor Wheeler for, on Monday, having the first woman African-American police chief sworn in, right?
Thank you, but I picked her because she was the best applicant.
That is a form of affirmative action. I think 30 years ago, they tried a woman police chief, and it didn't work out too well, so we'll see what happens. And for affirmative action, my best practice was I supported President Obama, and the following year, he won a Nobel Peace Prize, in which no president had won one for 90 years. So affirmative action does work in that case. They don't hand out Nobel Peace Prizes like candy. And number three thing, I was a soldier in the United States Army, and as a test and basic training, I had to take orders from a woman African-American drill sergeant, an American Indian drill sergeant. It's not easy. And she ran me through the ringer and made sure that I would, when I was in the Army, that I would follow the orders of women, lieutenants or higher up or whatever.
Especially if she's your drill sergeant.
Drill sergeant, it's a pretty stressful experience.
I'm sure it was.
And I didn't say anything or mouth off, so I wouldn't have got through the Army.
Very good, excellent.
That was in the 80s.
All right, colleagues, any further discussion on this issue? Any further questions? Commissioner Udaly? Call the roll, please, Carla.
Udaly?
Thank you for presenting the plan, and I look forward to working with your office on making the city a more welcoming and inclusive employer for everyone, but in particular for people with disabilities. Aye.
Fritz?
Well, thank you, Director Calmey, and also Mr. Adair for all your work on this and for nudging us when we didn't get our stuff in on time. And I want to thank Pooja Bhatt in my office, who her work is very much reflected in our plan, and I very much appreciate it. Also, she's my senior policy advisor to Portland Parks and Recreation. They have a racial equity plan that is referenced here, and which we're hoping to bring to council as suggested by my colleagues, so that we all know and buy into the plans that bureaus are doing. I do notice that 3 of the categories, no 4, are within Portland Parks and Recreation where we're not yet meeting our goal. That's in the technicians and the service maintenance folks in botany and in the park rangers. So we will make sure that we focus on those particular areas. I'm actually quite surprised that we're doing so well throughout the city. And what we need to do also is make sure that there's a succession planning and opportunities for advancement for everybody in every category, so that, as was mentioned, that there's more representative leadership in all of the bureaus. Aye.
Fish?
Thank you for your presentation and excellent work, and we have a lot of work to do, but you've given us a clear roadmap. Aye.
Saltzman?
Thank you for your work, Donnie and Anna both, and everybody else who helped put together this plan. And it remains always an eternal call to action to do better. And having the roadmap helps. Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you both very much. Colleagues, given the lateness of the hour, here's what I'd like to do. First of all, could I ask a question? Is there anybody here who is being appointed to the Rental Services Commission? Did anybody show up? Could you do me a favor, since we're probably not going to take the vote, could you come up now and introduce yourself to us? Is that a possibility? Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
My name is Alan Hines. I'm a member of the Disability Committee, and I know how difficult it is for our community to find housing. And I really want to support the city to adopt policies that make it easier for people with disability and seniors to find and maintain housing.
Thank you. Very much, and I appreciate your coming in today, and this afternoon you will be appointed to the Rental Services Commission, and I thank you for being here, and we appreciate your willingness to step up and provide both your perspective and your leadership and your advocacy for people in this community who need to be heard on these issues around housing. Thank you, sir.
Mayor, why don't we take the second vote on 1094?
Yes, take 1094, please call the roll. Sorry, Carl, I'm catching you off guard. Second reading of 1094.
Okay. Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted, so 1095, 96, and 97, which can be read together this afternoon, we'll put at the end of this afternoon's agenda. Same with 1098. And with that, we are adjourned until 2 p.m. Thank you, colleagues.